Chapter 2568. In other words, this guy was the weakest link in this group of enemies, the kind that needed to be protected. That was why he didn't leave this place. Although he had the protection of the solitary Great Emperor, the injuries on this guy's body were still riddled with wounds. They believed that as long as they put in a little more effort, they would be able to kill him. As long as this person was killed, there would be a gap in the enemy's formation, and they would be able to secure victory. Driven by this thought, more and more people gathered around. Soon, more and more people gathered around them. Rui Badong shouted, "Your Majesty, I can't protect you anymore." With a swoosh, he ran away. "You're protecting your Majesty? What kind of joke is this? It's obviously your Majesty who is protecting you. And now that the situation is critical, as a guard, you actually ran away without a care? How can people be so shameless? This is really a little too shameless. However, it's better for you to split up. It'll be easier for us to defeat you one by one. Dealing with this guy alone is much less dangerous than dealing with the solitary Great Emperor together." Therefore, more than 40 people flew up and chased after him. On the other side, Luo Kadi and the sacrificial maiden wielded the Wolf Fang sword and the Wolf Fang sword respectively. The couple howled like wolves, one howling and the other howling. Although there were only the two of them, they had the power of 10,000 wolves howling at the same time, even though they were on a battlefield of life and death that was constantly changing, and they were here for revenge. Chu Yang and the rest still felt a little scared. They really didn't expect that Luo Kadi, who had never found a wife, would actually find such a perfect match here. Continuous howls of wolves could be heard. One by one, experts fell down just like that, never to be seen again. Xue Xian'er's eyes were fixed on Chu Yang, who was engaged in a frenzy of killing. At the same time, she was also paying attention to Emo Qingwu, who was fighting alongside Chu Yang. The two of them were sometimes together and sometimes apart. Their cooperation was flawless, like a perfect pair of pearls and jade. Xue Xian'er's split body was a little hesitant. Her rationality told her that the most dangerous enemy now was this solitary Great Emperor who was on a killing spree and needed to be eliminated immediately. But her emotions urged her to move step by step towards Emo Qingwu. The jealousy in her heart had already made her close to madness. No matter what, she would not allow another woman who was more beautiful than her to exist in this world. As long as such a woman exists, she must be eradicated. The former one was already dead. This one had to die too. Once a woman's jealousy rose, her actions would no longer be reasonable, and she would become unreasonable. Under this kind of mentality, all of the reasons, right and wrong, and reasons were not important. They were meaningless. As a result, amidst the sounds of fighting that were as loud as the mountains, Xue Xian'er's white clothes flashed. He leaped up and attacked from the sky. In an instant, countless rays of white light fell down like an inescapable net. At the moment of the descent, sharp knives with barbs appeared out of thin air on the dense net that was like an inescapable net. The blade was glowing with a blue light. A loud boom resounded in the empty sky. This sudden change caused the power of the attack to increase even more. It even blocked off all the paths that Emo Qingwu could take to advance or retreat. This kind of attack was obviously meant to kill Emo Qingwu in one blow. Even if she was lucky enough not to die, as long as these barbed knives came close to her body, her beautiful face would be destroyed in an instant. Her snow-white jade-like skin could no longer recover. No one knew that Xue Xian'er had added an extremely powerful poison on top of this inescapable net divine technique. Similarly, no one knew that Xue Xian'er, who looked as pure and holy as a snow fairy, was not only cruel and merciless, she was also a venomous woman. An expert in the way of poison. No matter how beautiful a woman was, once she was poisoned, there would be no cure for her life. And this kind of poison was only effective against women. It was useless against men. Emo Qingwu was just about to escape when she suddenly felt that the air around her had become extremely sticky. Although she was still confident that she could break free, she would not be able to deal with the attacks of more than 10 opponents at the same time. And even if she could deal with the people in front of her, how could she deal with the net above her head? 3 dangers, 3 attacks from 3 sides. How should she choose? Mo Qingwu's face turned cold. Suddenly, she let out a soft roar and activated her peak cultivation. She exploded with a powerful force and broke free from the restraint of the external force. The Qingwu Dream Saber in her hand shone with endless light. She slashed hundreds of times consecutively at the speed of lightning, forcing back more than 10 enemies in front and behind her. 2 of them had blood spurting out from their bodies. After pushing back the enemies in an instant, the Qingwu Dream Saber shone again and was about to slash at the net that was about to reach her. The saber aura had already formed. It shone with a faint green light. The power of this saber was enough to make gods and demons retreat and silence the fairies. Xue Xian's white-clothed figure flashed over with an extremely cruel smile on her face. An enormous external force appeared once again, instantly sealing off the surrounding environment. Her meticulous plan was all for this moment. This little girl actually wants to use the saber aura to break the inescapable net divine technique. How can that be? Just be obedient and be disfigured. There is no woman more beautiful than me in this world. There isn't one in the past, now, and in the future. Yo, little sister, you look so beautiful. What a beauty! Xue Xian's voice was gentle and soft. Come, let me take a closer look. This little face is really, really beautiful. It's just that this face can only be a memory. Then she waved her white hands, and 2 white ribbons flew out like long dragons. They forcibly entangled the dreaming of a gentle dance saber. The invincible and indestructible saber aura got suppressed and couldn't display its might for a while. Seeing that the big net was about to fall. At this moment, a white figure flashed through the air and a clear voice laughed. Such a good fishing net is better used to catch fish. How can you throw it at people's heads? You are not human. A slender hand grabbed onto the tip of one of the hidden sabers on the inescapable net. Then, using the tip of the saber, the net was lifted into the air, and with a wave of her hand, the net was turned into a rod-like object. Then, she smashed it down toward Xue Xian, with the momentum of the rod-like object. Xue Xian, retreated in shock. This net was called the Tears of Beauties. Although it was not very lethal, it was a nightmare to any woman. Beauties have tears, and tears can change their beauty. As long as a woman came into contact with this net, she would be poisoned immediately. Furthermore, even Xue Xian, did not have the antidote. If she was careless, she would not be able to recover for the rest of her life. There were restrictions placed on it by the Saint Monarch and her own cultivation. It looked ordinary, but it was definitely not. Every time she used it, there would be a space lock and poison spreading in all directions. But this person was able to grab it so easily and was not affected by it at all. Xue Xian, looked over and saw a young girl in white. She was slim and elegant like a white lotus out of the water. She looked smart and was looking at her mockingly. Xue Xian, was holding the net in her hand like a dead fish. She did not care about it at all. When Xue Xian, saw this, she was truly shocked. She had only caught a glimpse of the girl and did not observe her closely. At first, she thought that the girl was wearing some kind of mystical glove on her hand that could ward off poison. But now that she took a closer look, the girl clearly did not wear any glove on her hand. She was just holding the tip of the knife with 2 fingers. But why was she not poisoned? This young girl was, of course, Chulu. She held Xue Xian's Tears of Beauties and said mockingly, "A Saint Empress is actually using such a broken net as a weapon? Isn't it too embarrassing?" She then pouted and said, "Here, I'll return this to you. But please don't take it out and embarrass yourself in the future. Even I feel embarrassed for you." She then threw the vicious net back to Xue Xian. How could Chulu, throw this harmful weapon back to Xue Xian, so casually? Was she really that stupid? Xue Xian, smiled sweetly and said, "Even a Saint Empress has to share the joys and sorrows of the people. What good things can there be in this world?" She then took the net back. It was not easy to make this inescapable net. Since she had the chance to get it back, how could she miss it? But Xue Xian, was more concerned about what was wrong with it. She had to find out. Why was she not poisoned? Furthermore, even though the net looked like a net, its ingenuity was endless. Even the threads that formed the net were treasures that were hard to find in this world. How could she throw it away so casually? Was it because this girl was from a side sect and did not recognize such a treasure? Or was it because of her high status that she did not care about this item? However, the moment Xuexian held the net in her hands, she suddenly screamed and threw the net away. There was a third possibility: she was using this mechanism to fight. But Xuexian realized it too late. At this moment, Xuexian's jade-like hands that were as white as snow had already turned green, following which it turned purple. Then, a faint purplish-black line could be seen climbing up her wrist. The speed at which it spread was actually visible to the naked eye. Xuexian's face turned pale. She hurriedly used her cultivation as a peak saint to stop the poison from spreading. But to her horror, she realized that this method was useless. The black and purple line was not affected by her spiritual energy at all. From beginning to end, it slowly rose up in an orderly manner. In the blink of an eye, it had reached her forearm. Her entire forearm had turned green. But fortunately, the line stopped moving when it reached her forearm. It was as if it was restrained by something. Chapter 2569. Although the cultivation of the four girls was not weak, their actual cultivation was much weaker than Gmo's. Especially when Gmo pretended to be weak, they were all killed instantly when he suddenly burst out. Perhaps they did not expect that the perverted hooligan whom they were suppressing just now would suddenly burst out with such powerful energy. Was this a joke? However, this joke could only be explained in the netherworld. Across the entire Holy Emperor Palace, the sounds of fighting had already become fragmented, and there was not much left. There were tens of thousands of experts here, and most of them had turned into dust. Xuexian looked at the corpses around her and sighed. If we did not rush to the other worlds and divert more than half of the experts from Holy Emperor Palace, how could you break into Holy Emperor Palace so easily? An elegant voice said, if Holy Emperor Palace did not send so many experts to hurt my brother, we would not have thought of destroying Holy Emperor Palace this time. There is a cause and effect. You did the first, we did the 15th. That's all. Following the voice, a person walked in slowly from the direction of the gate. The person was dressed in white, clean and elegant. He walked calmly, and a purple jade flute shone in his hand. As this person walked over, it was as if the entire situation was under his control. Emotianji. When Chu appeared, it meant that the two of them had completely sealed off the outside of Holy Emperor Palace. And Emotianji's appearance was tantamount to announcing another thing. From now on, this Holy Emperor Palace. It could already be equated to death. Unless they had Emotianji's permission, they wouldn't be able to enter. No one could come out. All the paths here were controlled by Emotianji. When Emotianji came in, he immediately said, seize the time and kill everyone who needs to be killed. Tonight, no one will be left alive in Holy Emperor Palace. Heaven Fault Holy Land will be Heaven Fault Holy Land. As soon as he heard this, the guards of Holy Emperor Palace, who still had some fighting spirit, instantly collapsed. They watched as the number of people on their side decreased, and the living people turned into corpses one by one. Some even died without a complete corpse. From tens of thousands of people to less than 1,000 now. No matter how they struggled and fought, only death awaited them. How could they not be afraid? In an absolute disadvantage. Seeing that the saints, who were usually high and mighty, were also being forced into a corner and were about to be defeated and die, who would be willing to stay here and wait for death? Once their fighting spirit crumbled, it was unknown who took the lead to shout, but the thousands of people immediately scattered like birds and beasts, fleeing in all directions. Where there is life, there is hope. Besides, I'm going to deliver a message to His Majesty the Sage Monarch. It can't be considered an escape, it's just a strategic diversion. For the Holy Emperor Palace, he would leave behind a spark and hope. Leaving the future behind. With such thoughts in mind, everyone was instantly cleansed. Chu Yang, Emotianji, Chulu, and the others all revealed cruel smiles as they watched these people escape. Sure enough, those people had only charged out a few thousand feet when they seemed to have bumped into an invisible barrier, and they were unable to take another step forward. This was the power of the array formation. With Imo Tianji's unique means and the unique geographical conditions of this place, setting up such a ceiling formation was simply a piece of cake for him. He could achieve twice the result with half the effort. In the next moment, the people who hit the barrier all screamed in pain. The poison that Chu Lu had set up immediately took effect the moment it came into contact with them. One by one, they rolled, screamed, begged, and cursed. However, not long after, these people fell to the ground with their bodies convulsing. There was no more sound. Shui Xian'er's face was still vaguely filled with anger when she saw everyone suddenly running away. However, as she watched until now and saw everyone dying in such a bizarre manner, Shui Xian'er's face finally changed and fear began to grow in her heart. She turned her head and looked at Chu Lu with some fear. She asked word by word, "You did this?" Chu smiled sweetly. "I'm an expert in using poison. Please enlighten me." Shui Xian'er's heart really fell into an ice cave at this moment. At least she knew that it was impossible for her to use poison to kill so many people at once in such a spacious place. This was no longer a matter of pure means. Poison, means, timing, dosage, all the conditions had to be calculated perfectly, and it also required a lot of experience in using poison. Only by combining all of the above could it be possible to accomplish this. Yes, only then could it be possible. And this girl did it beautifully in front of the Divine Empress, in front of Shui Xian'er. For the first time, Shui Xian'er was touched by her own safety. "You're indeed stronger than me." Shui Xian'er seemed indifferent to the tragic deaths of her subordinates. She smiled faintly and said, "Heroes come from young. I'm impressed." Chu Lu said, "Stronger than you? I thought you were just flattered by your subordinates and didn't know your place. It turns out that you're really ignorant. Oh right, you haven't told me where you found the tear of heaven's pride?" Shui Xian'er's clone frowned and smiled. "I can tell you the truth and I can even give you a batch. However, the condition is that you let me go?" Chu nodded. "Sure, as long as you're telling the truth." Shui Xian'er didn't fall for it. She said, "What about my poison?" Chu Lu said, "As long as you do what you say, I'll cure you of the poison. You can rest assured about this." Shui Xian'er heaved a sigh of relief. She said, "But how can I trust you? I can tell you where the tear of heaven's pride is produced, and I can also give you the tear of heaven's pride that I have. However, how can you gain my trust?" Chu Lu smiled. "There's no good way for this. You can only gamble now that I'm trustworthy. Because you don't have any other choice. If I go back on my words, you can only die. If I keep my word, you can live. I wonder if the heavens will look after you." Shui Xian'er was speechless. She's such a hoodlum. She actually met the legendary female hoodlum today. She's such a pretty and pitiful young lady. She's actually such a hoodlum. Chu Lu reminded him kindly, "That's right, I'm deliberately controlling the poison in your body now. It won't continue to spread. If you don't make a decision soon, I won't be able to control it for long given my low cultivation level. Your life is now in your own hands. You know what I'm talking about, right? Poison expert." As if confirming Chu Lu's words, the purplish-black poison lines on Shui Xian'er's arms suddenly moved at this moment. At this moment, it actually moved at the right time. In an instant, it spread up a distance of no less than half a foot. Her entire arm was originally as white as snow. But now, it was extremely swollen. It was unbearable to look at. In fact, it was even emitting a faint stench that made one want to vomit. On the other side, another scream was heard. Another peak-level saint slowly shriveled under Chu Yang's sword. There was a look of despair in his eyes. Along with this scream on the other side, almost at the same time, another scream was heard, followed by a muffled groan. Luo Kadi groaned. He staggered backward and kept vomiting blood. However, the peak-level saint opposite him had already been split into two halves from his shoulder to his lower abdomen. He died with his eyes wide open. Then, without waiting for the others to react, Rui Badong opened his mouth. With a boom, a ball of nirvana flame enveloped that corpse and burned it fiercely. All the remaining primordial spirit and soul consciousness of that person were completely burned away by this ball of nirvana flame. GMO, Lady Priest, Mo Qingwu and the others also successively succeeded. There were not many people left on the Holy Emperor Palace's side. At this point, Chu Yang no longer concealed himself. He controlled the Calamity Sword and used all his strength to attack the remaining 5 experts. His current cultivation was already comparable to Donghuang Shui Leihan. If he used the Calamity Sword and used all his strength, he believed that even Shui Leihan might not be Chu Yang's match. Although the 5 people opposite him were also peak-level experts, they were still some distance away from Zue Wuqing and the others. They were even further away from Donghuang. Chu Yang had unleashed his full strength at this time. So, these 5 experts had been completely killed in the blink of an eye. After the Calamity Sword devoured the soul energy, it let out a cheerful sword cry and rushed into Chu Yang's body. This battle was undoubtedly a great supplement for the Calamity Sword. However, such a long battle also consumed a lot of energy. It needed to rest temporarily to consolidate its foundation and digest what it had gained. Seeing that she was the only one left in an extremely short period of time, Shui Xian finally panicked. She said decisively, "I believe you. I will tell you where the heaven's proud tear is." Although she would never be so naive to believe her enemy, she could only choose to believe at this time. Because she had no other choice. There wasn't a single other path. This was the last life-saving straw. No matter what, she had to try. It was only at this moment that she completely believed that in this world, there was actually someone who could use poison as if it was her own arm. Even if the poison had already entered someone else's body, she could still control it. Furthermore, she could control it so meticulously and freely. She believed that even the Sky Poison sect, which was famous for its time millions of years ago, had not heard of such a method. However, she had personally encountered it today. As a person who was good at using poison, Shui Xian's doppelganger knew how terrifying such a person was. Although the young girl in front of her looked pure and innocent, and even a little naive, in the eyes of Shui Xian's doppelganger, she was no different from the incarnation of a devil. Say it. Chu smiled very innocently. However, when Shui Xian saw her smile, she shuddered and said, "I don't have the finished product with me. Actually, that medicinal herb is behind this mountain, under the valley. When I found it, I didn't know that this medicinal herb was the heaven's proud tear. Until now, I still call it Beauty's Tear." Chapter 2570. Tears of Beauties? Chu Lu suddenly frowned in disgust. "You only use this kind of poison on women? Beauties?" Shui Xian lowered her head and nodded. Chu Lulu was indeed an expert in using poisons. She immediately understood what Chu Lu was trying to do. "You're also a woman. Don't you know how vicious this kind of poison is to women?" Chu Lu couldn't understand at all. She looked at the woman in front of her angrily. "Why did you do this?" "She's just a clone." Chu Yang walked over slowly and said indifferently, "This should have been ordered by her original body." "Clone." Shui Xian's clone trembled. Her biggest secret was actually exposed by this solitary emperor. "How did you know?" Shui Xian's clone suddenly raised her head and looked at Chu Yang in surprise. Her eyes were filled with intense fear and panic. She seemed to feel that she was standing naked in front of everyone and had no more secrets. "Of course I know," Chu Yang said coldly. Chu Lu said impatiently, "I'm only doing this for you. No matter if it's a clone or the original body, why would I do this?" After her biggest secret was exposed, Shui Xian's clone seemed to have lost all her energy. She was stunned for a while before she lowered her head and said in a low voice, "It's like this. The original owner of this body is extremely jealous. She didn't allow other women to get close to Cloud Shangren. Even us clones weren't allowed to get close to Cloud Shangren. However, she was born infertile. Cloud Shangren could only find other women to continue his bloodline, and every time he found one, Shui Xian would take this woman into the Saint Emperor Palace and take good care of her. After she gave birth, she would silently let her be tainted with tears of beauties, and her body would swell. Her skin would fester and become unrecognizable. But she would say that it was caused by childbirth. Often, these women would commit suicide because of this. Everyone couldn't help but curse when they heard this. This Shui Xian was really the most vicious woman in the world. She couldn't have children herself, so her husband found other women to have children with. After the children were born, she made them so miserable. What was Cloud Lord's identity? Based on Cloud Lord's judgment, any woman that he found pleasing to the eye would be a piece of cake to him. How could any of them be ugly? He believed that every single one of them was a peerless beauty. However, after such a woman was married, she would only have a few years of happiness at most. Once she gave birth to the child, she would immediately become a faceless yaksha. For a woman, as long as her looks were passable, once her face was disfigured, she would definitely die. That was a fate worse than death. He had nothing left to live for. What's more, these beauties were able to catch the eye of Master Yun. When a woman discovered that her originally fairy-like beautiful face had suddenly turned into a pig, she would not be able to bear it. What would happen if a pig was prettier than her? That was simply a tragedy. Instead of forcing him to commit suicide, it would be better to just kill him. It would also make it easier for women to accept. For women, it was only human nature to die for their beauty. It was absolutely not an illusion. He really deserves to die. Even Mo Qingwu couldn't help but curse. It could be seen that he was a man who specialized in destroying women. Moreover, it was a woman who specialized in destroying peerless beauties. How hateful! Chu snorted coldly and turned to leave. Following Shui Xian's instructions, they began to search the area. Mo Tianji, Chu Yang and the rest stared at this divine empress clone. There were a few sighs. She had such a peerless beauty, yet at the same time, she also had such a despicable and vile heart. He really didn't know how the heavens had managed to combine this extreme beauty with extreme viciousness, as well as extreme harshness and extreme ungratefulness when he was creating things. This was a mistake that absolutely shouldn't have happened. Therefore, when such a mistake happened, it would be a calamity to the world. Shui Xian stood quietly. Although her arm was still bruised and ugly, her expression had already regained its usual calmness. At least on the surface, she really looked very calm. After watching for a while, Chu Yang turned his head and sighed. Mo Tianji seemed to know what he was sighing about. He said, "No need to sigh. This is just a clone." Chu Yang nodded. "It still feels a little uncomfortable." Shui Xian's clone raised her head and looked at Chu Yang. "What's uncomfortable?" Chu Yang said coldly, "No matter what, you're still a divine empress clone. Furthermore, you have the cultivation of a peak saint. However, this time, not only are you afraid of death, but you also surrendered because of the poison. You don't even have any dignity or grace. This makes me feel very surprised, very unbelievable." Chu Yang explained in detail. He even added a series of adjectives at the end. This made Mo Tianji a little surprised. However, he immediately understood Chu Yang's meaning when he looked at him. He couldn't help but be shocked. Then, he started to listen attentively. Chu Yang was trying to find out the secret of clones. This point was extremely useful to him and the rest of the brothers present. Shui Xian's clone smiled bitterly and said, "Do you think that the divine empress clone must be high and mighty? That she would rather die than submit? That she must have grace, strength of character, and insist on her so-called dignity? That she would rather die than submit, and that she would rather die than submit?" Chu Yang said seriously, "Shouldn't that be the case? That's why I have doubts about your performance today. In fact, I even despise you." The word despise poked at Shui Xian's sore spot. She actually laughed coldly and said, "Of course, I'm Shui Xian's clone. This is an ironclad fact. However, Shui Xian and Lord Yun had no choice but to give us clones a physical soul in order to better control the Heaven Imperial Court. Although our souls are physical, we still have to be formed according to their wishes. Although the clone possesses great strength the moment it's formed, the formation of its personality still depends on the original body. One is marked by the company one keeps. Shui Xian, Er's clone actually said such a sentence. Chu Yang nodded. I understand a little, but there's more that I don't understand. No matter what, your performance just now was a little embarrassing. Embarrassing? Embarrassing is better than losing one's life. When clones like us die, we'll completely disappear and cease to exist. Although we can't betray, we still have the right to live. If we're embarrassed, at least there's a slight chance of survival. But the original body is different. When the original body encounters such a situation, it can definitely die in battle and even drag you down with it. Because as long as there's still a clone, this clone can naturally evolve into a new original body after the death of the original body. She laughed coldly. That's why they have both magnanimity and integrity. But we don't have such magnanimity, because we don't have the right or the ability. Clones can naturally evolve into a new original body after the death of the original body? Chu Yang muttered to himself. Shui Xianer's clone laughed loudly. You'll know sooner or later. But your current cultivation isn't at that stage yet. Solitary Emperor, although you can already defeat us clones, if you meet Lord Yun or Shui Xian, Er's original body, they can still crush you in an instant. Their power can't be sensed unless you experience it yourself. She didn't say much, but Chu Yang already understood a lot. He smiled slightly and didn't refute. For someone who was about to die, it wasn't worth wasting his saliva. A white figure flashed and Chu Luker turned back excitedly. Have you found her? Shui Xian, Er's clone asked nervously. What she was worried about wasn't whether Chu Lur had been found, but whether Chu Lur would keep her promise. Found her. You didn't lie indeed. Chu smiled satisfactorily. Then, will you cure me of the poison? Shui Xian, Er's clone asked. This was what the clone was most concerned about. She was really afraid of the unfavorable changes that could happen in the next moment. Of course, Chu Lur agreed readily. I'm a person of my word. I'll cure you of the poison now. As she spoke, she waved her hand, and a wisp of white smoke appeared. The next moment, the wisp of white smoke circled around Shui Xianer's arm. Almost at the same time as they came into contact, they saw that the greenish-purple line was gradually retreating. Finally, a string of black blood beads appeared at the tip of Shui Xianer's finger, and her skin instantly returned to normal. Thank you. Shui Xianer was relieved, and her body actually swayed a little. You can leave. Chu Lur emphasized, since I promised to let you go, I won't go back on my words. Shui Xian, heaved a sigh of relief and turned to leave. But before she could take a step, she stopped in her tracks. She seemed to have turned into a wooden statue. Then, she turned around abruptly and screamed, How do you expect me to leave? Where's my cultivation? Because at this moment, she suddenly realized that the power that could overturn rivers and seas in her body had completely disappeared. She even felt tired after taking a step. Not to mention soaring into the sky and transforming into a rainbow. What's going on? Chu Lur said regretfully, Oh, I forgot to tell you. The prerequisite for this poison to be cured is that you have to pay the price of your entire cultivation. You won't have any power at all in the next 60 hours after the poison is cured. However, it's only 60 hours, only 3 days. I believe that if you were given a choice, you wouldn't choose to be poisoned to death, right? Plot. Shui Xian, immediately sat on the ground. Her gaze was obscure, and she suddenly laughed bitterly. You're indeed lying to me. You're playing with me. You want to play me to death, Chu Lur said seriously. When did I lie to you? I promised you that I would cure you of the poison and let you go. Didn't I do it now? She had indeed done it. Shui Xian's clone laughed bitterly. Chapter 2571. He looked up. The world pride had exceeded 8 million words. Suddenly he was somewhat perplexed. Did I really write so much? Was this really written by me? Back then, the legend of Ling Tian had more than 2 million words, but when it reached 1 million, the plot couldn't continue. When it reached 3 million, the evil monarch of another world couldn't control himself, but this world pride was already 8 million words. Looking back, it was like a dream. He was somewhat disappointed, but have you all realized one thing? Did you know we still created a miracle in the land of unconsciousness? There were many books with more than 8 million words. But when it reached 8 million words, only the World Pride was still fighting on the monthly votes list. 8 million words were still fighting for the common cause. Only world-defying stage. We still haven't given up. We are still fighting. Facing this Jianghu, we can't lose. This is us. And only us. I am very proud. What I am even more proud of is, anyone who has written a novel knows that the more words there are, the harder it is to control. The later it is, the more complicated it is, and the more unclear it is, so I can only write slower and slower. So I'm proud. Because when it reached 8 million words, only I, wind conquers the world, am still wildly exploding. In the future, there will definitely be people who will surpass me, but now, I'm proud. For the world pride's 8 million words. For our pride. For the miracle we created. For my own pride. I want to say, please cast your monthly votes. All of the world pride, let us celebrate once. Celebrate because we are the only one. Just like this. Because this is the world pride. Because we all belong to the world pride. Shared glory, shared pride. Recalling the past, the world pride. How difficult it was to debut. How many hardships, sisters hand in hand, brothers side by side. How could the heroes of the world be bitterly disappointed? 3 years of wind and frost cast a lofty bone, and millions of brothers rushed forward. One battle, shocking the clouds. Chapter 2572. Shui Xian'er's clone could only feel despair. Yes, Chu Lu'er had fulfilled her promise. However, Shui Xian'er's current body had no cultivation at all. She might not even be as strong as an ordinary woman. No matter who she met, whether it was a human or a beast, she would only die if she walked out of here. Wild beasts didn't care about how beautiful a woman was. They only cared about the desire for good food. No man would let go of such a weak and peerless beauty. But this peerless beauty's identity was so shocking. Then, they could only finish her off after they had done that thing. Even if no one made things difficult for her, with her current body condition, how could she cross hundreds of thousands of miles to find the saint and the real body? 30 hours without any cultivation was a very long period of time. It was enough time for anything to happen. It could happen thousands of times, or even more times. Shui Xian'er was stunned for a while. Then she smiled bitterly and said, "So, I'm doomed. You were just fooling me, fooling me." She murmured and her voice became more and more desperate, and more vicious. It was a kind of extreme hatred. Looking at Chu Lu'er's indifferent expression, she finally gave up all hope. Her devastatingly beautiful face revealed the most sinister smile as she said, "If there comes a day when I make a comeback, little girl, I definitely won't kill you, and I won't cripple you like how you've crippled me. I'll only cripple your cultivation and sell you to the lowest brothel. I'll let you experience the pleasure of being ridden by thousands of people. You'll live for 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years. Forever and ever." Before she finished speaking, a sword had already nailed her to the ground. Calamity sword. Chu Yang's eyes were cold. He said indifferently, "You won't make a comeback one day. I promise. Also, my promise isn't just limited to you. It's effective on Shui Xian'er's clone and your real body. You can wait underground." The Calamity Sword's devouring power was activated again. A soul that had completely collapsed was facing the unparalleled devouring power of the Calamity Sword. There was no chance for her to escape. Chu Yang wouldn't let go of anyone who dared to curse his sister like this. While everyone was resting in the Saint Emperor Palace, Missouri Tianji had already entered the palace to look for something. After a while, he walked out. He smiled bitterly, "Lucky." In his hands were several thick rosters. Sure enough, the experts of the Holy Emperor Palace have been sent to different places. The few of us came here. It's really just a gift. Mo Tianji grinned. Chu Yang laughed. His Calamity Sword flashed and disappeared. Instead, he went into Holy Emperor Palace to look for treasures. Although there were no experts here, there were definitely treasures. Moreover, there would definitely be a lot of them. It should be very, very, very special. After all, this was Holy Emperor Palace. The number one sacred ground in Heaven Imperial Court. It was still okay if they had fewer treasures. A certain King Yenluo, who hadn't robbed for a long time, was finally going to do it again. In fact, Chu Yang didn't need to deliberately control it anymore. Tribulation Sword could do these things on its own. Where are we going next? Do we need to take another detour? Chu Yang asked. No need. Mo Tianji smiled and said, wait for me to transmit this information to the Tianji Intelligence Department and then announce it to the world. After that, we can travel day and night and go straight to the big Western paradise. Mo Tianji smiled and said, you can't wait, but I can't wait either. Chu Yang nodded. He looked to the west and said softly, I really don't know. How is Du Xing now? I'm really worried right now. While everyone was waiting for Tribulation Sword to come out, Mo Tianji stood next to Chu Yang, carefully considering something. After thinking for a while, he finally opened his mouth and said, Chu Yang, what do you think of this doppelganger? Chu Yang sighed and didn't open his mouth to speak. Mo Tianji also sighed along with him. I finally understand why at the level of Saint Monarch, one clearly has already touched the door to the next step, but still hasn't really taken another step forward. Chu Yang said deeply, there's a big chance that it's because of this doppelganger. Mo Tianji nodded, expressing his agreement. With this doppelganger, it's equivalent to not having most of the sense of danger. The more doppelganger, the safer the main body. Even if the main body dies, or even many of the doppelganger die, as long as one doppelganger is still alive, then this person can use this doppelganger to continue living. Moreover, it won't be long before the original body's strength can be recovered, just like being reborn. There's no loss at all. Moreover, one can create another doppelganger at any time to make up for the previous loss. In this way, the danger to oneself is indeed reduced to the minimum, and it's indeed the strongest life-saving method. There's no doubt about this. Chu Yang said, but for martial artists, without danger, there's no pressure. And without pressure, how can one advance and take another step forward? But once one has such a heaven-defying life-saving method, who would be willing to not use it? For the sake of a bleak future, one would give up such a wonderful life-saving method. As long as one has the slightest bit of intelligence, one would make a wise choice. Mo Tianji smiled bitterly and said, a few days ago, after my cultivation made another breakthrough, I faintly felt that I had naturally comprehended this method of creating doppelganger. But I've been hesitating, and I didn't dare to act rashly. This choice is really difficult. Even if I'm not tempted now, what about later? Under such a powerful example, who could resist the temptation to cultivate this perfect, secret technique of creating a doppelganger? But once it was started, it meant that one had jumped into a trap. From then on, one could practice the technique, improve one's cultivation, and purify one's power. But if one wanted to take a step further and jump out of the range of this heavenly imperial court, it would become something impossible. The path of cultivation was equivalent to coming to an end here. But if one continued to cultivate, it was also full of danger. Who knew, one might be struck by the heavenly tribulation in the next moment. So, the temptation of this doppelganger could be imagined. So, this secret technique of creating doppelganger, Chu Yang said word by word, we can't use it. No one can use it. We definitely can't use it. You can't even think about it. Chu Yang deliberately emphasized it 3 times. Mo Tianji said in horror, yes, I'll inform all the brothers immediately. I must inform all the brothers at the first possible moment. The lifespan that the heavens give everyone is actually only a little more than 100 years in the first place. To be able to live for more than 100 years is already considered a long lifespan. Some people decline due to various reasons, and there are even some who die prematurely at birth. But those are all personal opportunities. Chu Yang said deeply, and the path of cultivation is to go against the heavens and change one's fate. From the moment one starts to cultivate, one starts to fight against the heavens to take back what one is about to lose. To extend one's future path infinitely. On this path, with every step forward, the pressure one has to endure is also a step greater. So, in human nature, there is an instinctive desire to seek good fortune and avoid calamity. This may be a benefit that the heavens give to ordinary people, but to cultivators, every such opportunity is actually a trap that will bury one's future. The more perfect an opportunity looks, the more likely it is to hide a great danger. To go against the heavens and move forward, how can there be any leeway? So, we can't do it. Chu Yang's voice was awe-inspiring and full of decisiveness. We can't stop here. Chapter 2573. Perhaps when we've truly transcended the control of heaven and earth, it won't be too late to talk about this doppelganger. Chu Yang smiled. But when that time comes, do we still need to create doppelganger? Mo Tianji also laughed heartily. Only after Chu Yang had finished speaking did Mo Tianji truly dispel the idea of creating doppelganger. Mo Tianji himself also recognized that this was a trap, but this temptation was really too tempting. It was practically an exceptional secret technique tailor-made for people like Mo Tianji. Therefore, Mo Tianji having this kind of idea was actually a reasonable matter. Let's ask, with Mo Tianji's intelligence and wisdom, he had this kind of impulse, let alone other people. Because doppelganger could obtain too many advantages and could do too many things. For example, right now, if Mo Tianji had a doppelganger, his main body could accompany Chu Yang to battle here, and the other doppelganger could be in the big western paradise to help Gu Du-Xing deal with the crisis. If there was one more, he could even take care of Ao Xie Yun's side. This was really an irresistible temptation. Therefore, when Mo Tianji had learned about the doppelganger secret technique, he had been so excited. With this method, he could even more perfectly deal with the unfavorable situation before him, and even many subsequent problems would no longer be a problem. But Chu Yang had directly and mercilessly cut off this delusion. The saint is also an extremely intelligent person, but he still chose to create doppelganger. Mo Tianji let out a long sigh of relief. His heart was somewhat afraid, and his back was also covered in cold sweat. With the saint's intelligence, he couldn't have not known that this was a cultivation trap. But he still chose to do so. This was what he had thought a moment ago. It was completely the same. Perhaps only a sufficiently intelligent person would step into this cultivation trap, a person who truly wholeheartedly pursues the martial path. On the contrary, they wouldn't fall into this trap. Chu Yang somewhat couldn't help but laugh as he looked at Mo Tianji. Among us brothers, the one with the strongest desire should be you. Tianji. Mo Tianji's face flushed red, and there was an intense embarrassment. Like Gu Du-Xing and Dong Wushang, these two people would rather die than create doppelganger. GMO and Luo Kadi. His way of thinking and acting is closer to Gu Du-Xing and Dong Wushang, while Ao Xiyun and Xie Danqiong are closer to you. He definitely won't cultivate it. His nirvana divine ability is more advantageous than the cloning secret skill. He is the one we don't need to worry about. Chu Yang said, therefore, we only need to remind Ao Xiyun and Xie Danqiong. That will do. Tianji. Chu Yang muttered. Finally, he said, on the path of cultivation, there are times when you don't need to be so smart. You know what I'm talking about. Mo Tianji nodded deeply. His face was full of vigilance. Chu Yang Ran said, I've heard of such a story. Outside a village, there's a forest. No one has ever been able to pass through this forest. Naturally, no one knows what it's like outside the forest. According to ancient legends, this is the land of the jungle. There were man-eating demons. There were wolves, insects, tigers, leopards, and countless dangers. As long as a person went in, there was no hope of coming out alive. Everyone has been instilled with this kind of thinking by the elders in the village since they were young. There were also many smart people who tried to solve this mystery. However, as long as they walked into the jungle, they never came out again. It was as if the legend in the village was so unbreakable and unshakable. Until one day, someone made a bet that whoever went in and still came out alive would have to marry the most beautiful girl in the village. So, a young man walked in. But not long after he walked in, he died. Another young man also walked in, but he also died. For some reason, when he reached a certain place, he died just like that without any warning. Finally, a very simple and honest young man expressed his willingness to try. The people in the village usually called him a fool, because other than working, he didn't know anything else. But he loved that girl deeply. In order to marry her, he was willing to try. So, he also walked into the jungle. Chu Yang paused. 2 months later, he came back alive. He also brought back many things from outside the jungle. He said that there was a city outside the jungle, a very big city. As long as you can pass through the jungle, you will be able to reach it. Everyone was very curious. Why were so many smart people unable to pass through the jungle, but only this half-fool could pass through it? A few brave young men followed the fool through the jungle. They finally understood that in this jungle, there was actually not much danger. It was just that the jungle was too dense, and there were some hidden dangers like poisonous snakes or poisonous mushrooms. At most, there were only a few wolves. As long as you were brave enough to walk forward, you would definitely be able to get out. But the truly terrifying part of this jungle was that it was really big, deep, and dense. Without a few days of continuous walking, it was impossible to pass through it. And every night, the surrounding atmosphere would become abnormally terrifying. So many smart people who walked in, but most of them did not die in the jungle. In those hidden dangers of the jungle, they were all scared to death by themselves. But a simple-minded and honest person who did not think of anything finally walked out and came back, because his heart did not have so many distracting thoughts. Chu Yang said, "Let's not talk about how interesting this story is or how illogical and unreasonable it is, but this is the story. I'm done." The usually calm and collected Emotionji was already sweating profusely. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Yes." He understood the hidden meaning behind Chu Yang's story. Most of the time, people needed to be smart and intelligent in life. Smart and intelligent could solve most of the problems in life. However, under certain circumstances, only by stubbornly walking forward could one reach the other side. As the saying goes, more haste, less speed. What one can see but not reach, this also applied to smart people. If this story was told to others, it might not have any effect. But to Emo Tianji, it was like a blow to the head. Wisdom imbuement. A voice full of anticipation said, "Then, what happened next? Did this young man marry the girl he loved?" The two of them turned and saw Chu Lu, Emole, Xinyang, Wu Qianxian, Tai Budian. These women were waiting expectantly for Chu Yang to continue. They did not care at all about the logic behind this story. To women, what they really cared about was not the logic but whether this young man married the girl in the end. Logic and whatnot were not important to women. Including the careless Xinyang, the talented Tai Budian, and Wu Qianxian who was once the king of Hell Chu, they were all waiting, anticipating a perfect ending. Towards this mentality of women, Chu Yang and Emotionji were both dumbfounded, speechless, and even at a loss of what to do. "Oh my!" Emo Qingwu and Chu Lu pouted in dissatisfaction. "What exactly are you thinking about? Did that person marry the girl or not? Hurry up and tell us, isn't it just a matter of a sentence?" Chu Yang was speechless. "You all know that it's just a matter of a sentence. Can't you finish it yourself? Do you have to ask? Besides, in this story, is it important whether he marries the girl or not? It was completely, not even close. Women, what exactly are you thinking of course?" To Chu Yang and Emo Tianji, they already knew that they could not reason with women. They were all people who had been taught a painful lesson. If they tried to reason with women, there would only be one outcome, and that was a very, very tragic outcome. Digression, this principle is definitely applicable to most men and women. Please take this as a warning and do not try to change this principle. Otherwise, you will also end up very, very miserable. There was an awkward silence for a long while. This story has actually already ended here. Emo Tianji spread out his hands, speechless. Who cares about whether the girl is married or not? These are two completely different things. That won't do. That's even more wrong. Isn't the core of this story about a lover getting what he wants? Chu Le and Emo Qingwu objected fiercely. So, it's definitely not finished, right? Big brother, hurry up and tell us, stop beating around the bush. Did that silly boy marry the girl or not? What else is there after that? Chu Yang was tongue-tied for a while. Finally, he said with a black face, after this young man went back, he married the girl and then the story came to an end. He had originally intended to go along with the women's tastes and express the end, but this sentence caused even more trouble. How did it come to an end? And how did he marry the girl? What was the reaction of the villagers? Were they envious? There were also many who were jealous, right? What did the girl say? Would she have agreed so easily? This matter itself is unfair to that girl. Just a stupid bet ruined that girl's future for the rest of her life. Yes. How did this honest young man follow up? Even if they really got married, what about their wedding? Didn't that honest young man go to the city? He must have some decent betrothal gifts. What exactly were they? Was there anyone in the village who was jealous? Then they sabotaged it. This is an inevitable contradiction in the drama and an inevitable development. Your story is not exciting at all. It's just bones and no meat. It's not interesting at all. You really don't have any creative talent? Sigh. How many children did they have in the end? Chu Yang fell into a daze. If he had a choice or a medicine for regret, Chu Yang could swear to the heavens that he would never tell Emo Tianji any boring story. Wasn't that just asking for trouble for himself? And it was asking for trouble. A huge trouble. Chu Yang wailed in his heart, help. Chapter 2574. All the complex emotions in Chu Yang's heart were summed up in these three words, save me. Until the Calamity Sword came back from its looting, Chu Yang still hadn't finished telling the story that should have been over by the time Emo Tianji understood the truth. Fortunately, the Calamity Sword came back and flew back into Chu Yang's hands. Chu Yang expressed that he wanted to quickly tidy up this time's harvest. A group of ladies very sensibly and magnanimously expressed their permission, and finally ended this very painful story. Then everyone set off for the big western sky. On the way, Chu Yang was forced to tell half the story, but the permission was temporary. After tidying things up, everyone went on their way. The road was very boring, so they naturally had to tell the follow-up story. Therefore, a certain person told the story while still dealing with endless questions. He kept talking until Chu Yang even had the heart to die. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have cared if Emo Tianji died. Die the boss, not Tianji. Emo Tianji very rarely personally made a move. From afar, he scouted the road ahead, and together with Rui Butong, they left this dangerous area full of women. GMO and Luo Kudi followed far behind to hold the line. In the name of defending against the pursuers, who didn't know the truth. Regarding Chu Yang's miserable experience, everyone only rejoiced in his misfortune. Only you know how to tell stories. Go on. Talk to death. Die the boss, not die the brothers. This was Calamity's principle, and it hadn't changed in 100,000 years. Even the current Calamity Sword Master was no exception. This group of bastards who don't care about loyalty. Bullshit brothers, I'm already so miserable. No one said they would help. Chu Yang cursed in his heart, and continued to tell the story with a bitter face. He really collapsed. Sigh, no matter what kind of woman. No matter big or small, no matter beautiful or ugly, as long as they heard a love story, no matter what the original starting point was, their eyes would turn green. If you don't let them know the ending of this love story, and especially don't give them a satisfactory ending, then you just wait. Again, if the male compatriots here don't believe me, then you can try. I support you in trying. He, Chu Yang and the others rushed to the big western sky at night. Emo Tianji's subordinate Heavenly Secret Intelligence Department, the only subordinate organization of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion that hadn't been directly banned, had already spread the news of the Saint Emperor's Palace's destruction like a gust of wind to the entire Heavenly Imperial Court. Almost in an instant. This extremely shocking news was like dropping 70 to 80,000 atomic bombs in the entire Heaven Palace. The entire Heaven Palace was in an uproar. Regardless of whether they were rich or not, they were all buying this information to confirm its authenticity. They were all shaking their heads and sighing in shock. However, in the world of the truly powerful, this news was like a bolt from the blue. Indescribably shocking. For more than 1,000,000 years, Holy Emperor Palace, the supreme and sacred place of the Heaven Imperial Court, had been destroyed just like that since it was built. No one had ever dared to challenge it. In the blink of an eye, all of them were destroyed, as if they had no power to resist at all. According to reliable sources, after the Big Western Skies battle, the solitary emperor was no match for the Saint Emperor and joined hands with his subordinates to attack. In the end, they suffered a crushing defeat. All of their preparations were scattered. Years of painstaking planning. In the end, everything was destroyed. In the end, they flew into a rage and decided to retaliate. One day, the solitary emperor led several of his trusted subordinates to infiltrate the extreme sky. Taking advantage of the Saint Emperor's emptiness, they launched an attack. The Saint Emperor's palace, lacking the Saint Emperor, only had less than 10,000 men. They were unable to resist the solitary emperor who was determined to take revenge. Overnight, the Saint Emperor's palace completely collapsed. The Saint Emperor's palace was completely annihilated. A generation's Saint Empress Shuexian heir also perished. Then, a parenthesis was added. According to speculation, this is most likely the Saint Empress clone, not the real person. Such explosive news caused the Heaven Palace to be in an uproar. From the apex martial artists to the common people, everyone was talking about it. So much so that there was some disbelief. The powerful Saint Emperor's palace was destroyed just like that? Disappeared just like that? What did the news say? The solitary emperor was no match for the Saint Emperor and joined hands with his subordinates to attack? Angry and retaliating, he led several subordinates to attack the Saint Emperor's palace. The Saint Emperor's palace lacked the Saint Emperor and only had 10,000 men. They were unable to resist and were destroyed. It should be like that, right? Then the solitary emperor's strength seemed to be very, very, very strong, and even the Saint Empress perished? Although the news stated that it was possibly the clone, in the hearts of the people, they only paid attention to the first sentence. A generation's Saint Empress Shuexian heir also perished. This was even more shocking. In an instant, the entire Heaven Palace was in an uproar. After meals, in the streets and alleys, everyone was talking about it. Do you know? Something big happened. What big thing? The Saint Emperor's palace was annihilated by the solitary emperor. Not a single person was spared. Even the Saint Empress Shuexian heir was killed. Do you know? Something big happened. What big thing? The Saint Emperor's palace was annihilated by the solitary emperor. I heard that the solitary emperor even killed the Saint Empress Shuexian heir. I heard that he raped and then killed. Do you know? Something big happened. Just like that, the solitary emperor raped and killed all the men and women in the Saint Emperor's palace. Even the Saint Empress Shuexian heir was no exception. I'm so shocked. Tisk tsk? This solitary emperor is really lucky with women. I heard that the Saint Empress was the #1 beauty back then. For a time, rumors spread all over the Heaven Imperial Court. In just a few days, it had spread like a god, an immortal, a demon, and a ghost. The story was full of twists and turns. It also became even more confusing and confusing. People were talking about it with their saliva splattering everywhere and beaming with joy, as if they had seen it with their own eyes. The people who heard it were dumbfounded and nodded their heads repeatedly, fascinated. When the experts of the Saint Emperor's palace heard this news, they became even more furious and irritable. When they were outside, they originally wanted to bully and suppress others, but their nest was actually dug up by someone else. This was simply a great humiliation. This news spread to the ears of the saint very quickly. Could be said that, other than the internal members of the Tianji Intelligence Department, He was the first person to know about this news. When he heard this news, the saint fell into a rare silence. Then, he calmly continued to give orders. No one is allowed to act blindly without thinking. Everything will proceed according to the original plan. The saint's calmness at this time made everyone puzzled. His nest had been dug up and the Saint Empress had even done that. How could he still be so nonchalant? What was His Majesty the Saint thinking? But after the saint finished this sentence, he had already left with his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was still calm, and his eyes were still calm. Everyone, disperse. Wait for the next order. Only the last voice was transmitted back like this. In another elegant room, the saint was no longer as calm as before. His face was as gloomy as water. Although on the surface, he didn't seem to care about the gains and losses, but this unforeseen event was related to his foundation. How could he really not care? Not to mention, there were still many of his women in there. This time, they had all turned into ashes. Heaven and man were forever separated. No one could understand the anger in his heart at this moment. But he suppressed it with all his might. He didn't want others to know or notice. You all just want to use this to provoke me. But no matter what you do now, there will be a day when you all return it to me with interest. I won't allow any of you to die so easily. Just wait. Shen Jun Exen silently recited and memorized the following few names. All the leaders of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion. I won't let any of them off easily. Chu Yang, Gu Duxing, Xiedan Xiong, Dong Wushang, Rui Badong, GMO, Luokadi, Tan Tan, Aoshin, and Tai Budin, Zi Sheqing, Wu Chanqian, Mo Qingwu, Mo Lei, and even Dong Huang, Shui Leihan, Yao Exenth, and Mo Qingqing. All of you will die a horrible death. I could scheme Zi how to death that day. Do you think you can be an exception? The saint's heart was still in turmoil, but his face returned to calmness. It was extremely calm and indifferent, like the waves of the sea, calm and tranquil. The names of Chu Yang and the others were now famous in the Heavenly Armament Pavilion. The saint knew them like the back of his hand. But now, the saint was still uncertain. Were these people in the same group? Was there a unified organization? Or were they just in the nature of allies, but they were fighting for themselves? Who was it that had such a big move? To be able to create such a big commotion, this was undoubtedly the biggest mystery in the saint's heart at this moment. Of all the kidnappers, including their family members, there were only two people who hadn't been exposed until now, Mo Tianji and Chu Lu. And of these two people who hadn't been exposed, one of them was the #1 poison expert in the world, the one who could silently and soundlessly kill people on a large scale without leaving any traces. Chu Lu. And the other person was the ultimate source of the chaos in the Heavenly Armament Pavilion, the mastermind behind the scenes who controlled everything. Mo Tianji. I believe that the sage may never know what I've missed out in the end. What is my own mystery, in the end? Beside him was the somewhat pale Western Skies Maniac Sword Heavenly Emperor, Wuya. Your Majesty. Maniac Sword Heavenly Emperor Wuya said softly, I'm afraid this unforeseen event might not have been done by the solitary emperor. The saint rolled his eyes and said with a faint smile, His faint smile and calm expression concealed a bone-piercing chill. Even someone like the Maniac Sword Heavenly Emperor couldn't help but tremble when he saw his calm expression. Chapter 2575. At that time, when the solitary emperor made the final decisive battle, we gathered all the power of the big Western Skies upper echelons to meet him. At the most crucial moment, His Majesty, the Sage Monarch, personally made a move to change the situation of the battle, seriously injuring Gu Duxing and that Bu Luqing. Although these two people were ultimately lucky enough to escape under the cover of the self-detonation of countless experts of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion, their injuries were absolutely not fake. According to my conjecture, under such serious injuries, even if they had rare elixirs and pure cultivation to recover, the fact that these two people could stand up now is already a great miracle. Not to mention that they completely recovered in such a short period of time, rushed 270,000 li, sneak attacked the Sage Monarch Palace and destroyed the entire Sage Monarch Palace, and even the entire battle strength of the Sage Monarch Palace? This is absolutely impossible. Wu Yequang carefully said. Thinking of that decisive battle, Wu Yequang still felt his mind shake, and even had lingering fears. He had lived for more than 1,000,000 years, and had experienced countless battles, but had never had any battle that was so desperate to that extent. But the Heavenly Armament Pavilion did it. Gu Duxing's Heavenly Armament Pavilion, in the face of the entire Heavenly Court's power, unexpectedly occupied the upper hand, and even had the Sage Monarch Palace's experts powerfully intervened and attacked from two sides, but they still fought desperately. Although they were defeated, they were not routed, until the Sage Monarch personally made a move, seriously injuring Gu Duxing and Bu Luqing, and they were thoroughly defeated. However, the battle was not over yet, because the solitary emperor was seriously injured by the Sage Monarch, and the battle after he was defeated truly moved everyone to think of it and made them look askance. Originally, when Gu Duxing was defeated, the Sage Monarch Palace and the Big Western Skies experts thought that victory and defeat was clear. The battle situation was already set, but unexpectedly, the Heavenly Armament Pavilion's experts, seeing Gu Duxing seriously injured at first, not only did they not become timid, but their fighting spirit soared. In order to cover Gu Duxing's escape, every person of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion dashed forward without thinking of their own safety, and with continuous self-detonation, they attacked as if they were going to die. Unexpectedly, they stopped the Sage Monarch's pursuit of Gu Duxing's footsteps. That kind of heroism, even now when he thought of it, made Wu Yequang's back feel cold. Fortunately, on that day, he welcomed those self-detonation type attacks. It was the Sage Monarch himself. If it was himself, Wu Yequang really did not dare to think of it. The Sage Monarch snorted and his teacup. His eyes revealed intense anger. During the battle that day, he had clearly chosen the best time to attack. Thus, Bu Luqing and Gu Duxing were severely injured at the same time. While the other party's momentum was at its peak, he defeated them head-on. If there was a flaw, then the only flaw was that he couldn't kill the two of them on the spot. Then, the situation of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion took a turn for the worse. However, they did not expect that thousands of saints would suddenly go crazy at that moment. 300 people. At the same time, he self-detonated while the sage was chasing after him. There were still 700 people who were fighting with their lives on the line. Not to kill the enemy, but to obstruct them. Gu Duxing and Bu Luqing were nowhere to be found by the time these people were eliminated under such a tragic cover. Even the sage's heaven-toppling and earth-toppling technique couldn't find its whereabouts. A little flaw led to the biggest regret. It even led to such a serious consequence. It didn't matter whether the culprit behind the destruction of the Holy Emperor Palace was Duxing Heavenly Emperor or not. But it was certain that Gu Duxing was closely related to him. Of course, this was not done by Gu Duxing, the sage snorted coldly. They attacked the Holy Emperor Palace with the purpose of creating a diversion and besieging the way to rescue the Zhao. Do you think it's so easy to divert my attention? Your Majesty is wise. Wu Yequang said respectfully. However, Your Majesty is wise and farsighted. Although you can remain unmoved, others may not. Wu Yequang frowned. Do we need? No need. The sage frowned. Only in this way, when everyone's hearts are shaken and flaws appear, will they dare to come. We need to create opportunities for them. Only then will they have the guts to come. The sage's eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. We just need them to come. As long as they come, they will be buried here. If the Holy Emperor Palace is gone, we can rebuild it in the future. If experts are gone, we can recruit and nurture new ones. If grandsons are gone, we can have more. If wives are gone, we can find new ones. Because there's still me. With me here, even if people's hearts are shaken, even if there are flaws, so what? How can a few jumping clowns shake the big picture? The sage's voice was flat without ripples. And if these jumping clowns of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion are gone, then they really are gone. Wu Yequang only felt a chill rise up his spine. At this moment he almost shivered. Regarding the remnants of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion, your big Western Sky's official search and capture. The sage looked at Wu Yequang. Is too perfunctory. Wu Yequang smiled bitterly. Previously, there was a continuous year and a half of fighting. The big Western Sky's elites have already been lost. Moreover, these people of the Heavenly Armament Pavilion are extremely united. Even if we occasionally catch a few, no matter what kind of punishment we use, they won't reveal any useful information. If they're forced into a corner, they'll commit suicide. There are even a few people who, seeing that they won't be spared, simply kill themselves. Your Majesty doesn't need to worry for the time being. I'll give the order to quickly investigate. Seeing that the sage's complexion was gradually becoming somewhat unsightly, Wu Yequang hurriedly followed up with a promise. We must catch Gu Duxing in the shortest time possible. This is very important. Go then. Watching the crazed sword Heavenly Emperor leave, the teacup in the sage's hand silently turned into fine powder. His expression was malicious, and he muttered, "Only a doppelganger died, only a doppelganger died." There was an indescribable feeling in his voice. But one could faintly hear that there was a kind of regret. In some hidden place in the big Western Sky, Gu Duxing, dressed in black, calmly stood there. Behind him was the similarly seriously injured Bu Luqing. At his side, there was also Gu Miaoling, who was gasping for breath. It was clear at a glance that these three people were already exhausted to the extreme. The heavy pills that Gu Duxing carried at his side had already been distributed by Gu Miaoling to Gu Duxing and Bu Luqing. However, in the face of the injuries that the sage had personally created, the heavy pills could alleviate a little. But the effect that they could have was already not much. Previously, when everyone was treating GMO, they had mentioned that the sage's power was already mixed with the power of law. And this was precisely the special injury that the heavy pills were unable to eliminate. Previously, at the most critical moment, Bu Luqing had burned his soul force and all of his life's potential as the price to erupt with his final strength. At that time, he had already been seriously injured and unable to move, forcibly breaking through the battlefield with Gu Duxing. He only had enough time to bring Gu Miaoling and escape from the battlefield amidst the chaos. At the moment when the sage had just made his move, because Bu Luqing was a bit further away. Moreover, at the crucial moment, Gu Duxing had single-handedly blocked the majority of the sage's attacks, preserving a part of his battle strength for him. It was also because of this that Bu Luqing had the strength to break out of the siege at the final moment. At that time, the sage had made his move. Bu Luqing, who had been on the battlefield for a long time and was even more proficient in understanding the key points, immediately knew, it's over, there's no more luck in this battle. Therefore, he made a prompt decision, dragging Gu Duxing and immediately fleeing. He himself didn't even distinguish any direction, only knowing that in the chaos, he was fleeing in the opposite direction of the most chaotic battlefield, breaking through layers upon layers of obstacles, avoiding who knows how many interceptions. Only then could he be considered to have shaken off his pursuers. Finally, when he reached the lakeside and wanted to leap over the lake to escape, he fell in midair. The three of them fell to the bottom of the lake at the same time. At that moment, Bu Luqing had already reached the point where he was like a lamp that had run out of oil. If not for that lake, the three of them might really have been finished. It was Gu Miaoling, who had the weakest cultivation, who dragged the two big men to the lakeside at that time, found a hidden water cave and hid in it. Then, she drained all the water inside, and sealed the entrance from the outside. This cave was equivalent to being submerged underwater, forming a secret space. Chu Yang had previously left a total of 3 heavy pills for Gu Duxing, and Gu Miaoling had given each of them one. Bu Luqing had previously burned his soul force and all of his life potential, and his injuries were extremely serious, but the heavy pills were still relatively effective for such injuries. Although it couldn't turn the situation around, but for a short period of time, his life wasn't in danger. The one who was truly in trouble was Gu Duxing, who had suffered heavy injuries from the sage. In addition to his internal and external injuries, there was also the threat of the power of the law, and the effectiveness of one heavy pill was limited. Gu Miaoling was helpless, and could only give the last heavy pill to Gu Duxing. Fortunately, although this heavy pill was still affected by the power of the law, it still prevented Gu Duxing's injuries from worsening. Until today, Gu Duxing finally woke up. As long as a person woke up, it meant that there was a turning point. That day, GMO had been heavily injured by the sage and had never woken up, so he couldn't use his cultivation to resist the sage's special power that had invaded his body. In that situation, any external force or special medicine had extremely limited effects, but when the injured person regained consciousness, he could take the initiative to resist his injuries and heal himself. Although it might not be able to expel the power of the law, his condition was still much better. But after waking up, Gu Duxing remained expressionless and had been standing for a long time. As long as he woke up, he refused to lie down, and even more refused to sit, and insisted on standing like this. After a long time, Gu Duxing hoarsely asked, "Sister Xiao Miao, where is this place?" Speaking of which, the two had been married for a long time, but I still call you Sister Xiao Miao, and you call me little brother. Gu Miaoling gently said, "This is outside the battlefield. I also don't know where this place is, but it's very safe. You should recuperate well and don't think about anything else." Gu Duxing listened to the sound of water outside and said, "This is the bottom of the water?" "Yes, it should be." Gu Miaoling dragged her equally tired body and took out some dry rations from the space ring and said, "You should eat something first. Your injuries are not light, you should recover your strength first, and then we can slowly think of a way." Gu Duxing woodenly agreed, and took the dry rations, and put them in his mouth. But after chewing 2 mouthfuls, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood, and even the dry rations that he had just chewed up were sprayed on the ground. Chapter 2576. Gu Miaoling could only be ranked second when it came to the number of people who were always by Gu Duxing's side. The Black Dragon Sword was Gu Duxing's personal weapon that never left his side. Whether it was eating, sleeping, or bathing, it never left his side. In this battle, it was also lost. But only when Chu Yang and Mo Tianji's group of brothers come, can we be considered to have passed the crisis. Gu Miaoling thought. "Little brother, no matter when, I will accompany you. If you win, I will accompany you to rule the world and look down on the universe. If you lose, I will accompany you to make a comeback. If you die, I will accompany you to assimilate the withered bones and walk in the spring with you. Even if my soul is scattered and my spirit is destroyed, I will also transform into a cloud of smoke in the vast sky." Gu Duxing was adjusting his breathing. But just as he absorbed a wisp of spiritual energy into his dantian, he felt a spiritual energy whirlpool forming above his head. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. He immediately stopped and opened his eyes. "What's wrong?" Gu Miaoling sensed the change in spiritual energy and immediately asked, "This won't do. If I mobilize the spiritual energy in the sky, a small amount of spiritual energy is not enough to support my healing. But if I mobilize a large amount of spiritual energy, it will inevitably cause a big commotion in the sky. There is a great chance that the enemy will notice. They must be searching for our whereabouts now." Gu Duxing said, "We don't have any external help now. Boss and the others can't come in a short time. Once we are discovered, only death awaits." Gu Miaoling was stunned. Then what should we do? If he couldn't even heal, then wouldn't that be an even more dead end? Gu Duxing pursed his lips. He pondered and said, "We are underwater now. Water also has spiritual energy. And, underground, there is also spiritual energy. Let me try and see if I can absorb water and underground life energy." There was too much uncertainty in his voice. Because he had a similar feeling before. That was when he was 3 days in the heavenly layer continent. But, after cultivating, he still felt that it was not as sharp as directly absorbing spiritual energy from the sky. Moreover, the spiritual energy underground was thick. It did not seem to match with his sharp swordsmanship at that time, so he stopped trying. Until now, he thought of it again. Now that he had been forced into a corner, this was the only path he could try his best to take. Then give it a try. It must be possible. The heavens bless the good, and the heavens never seal off all paths, Gu Miaoling encouraged. Gu Duxing nodded. He closed his eyes and began to try. Gradually, he began to try to absorb the vital energy in the water and underground. Instead, he discarded all the vital energy in the air. He couldn't let Sister Xiao Miao and Bu Luqing die here because of him. Therefore, the top couldn't be moved, Gu Duxing thought so. He started to circulate his energy. Gradually, he entered a meditative state. Perhaps even he himself did not expect this. His helpless action today had allowed him to truly step into the supreme great Tao of swordsmanship where fire and water came from the same source, yin and yang walked the same path, and heaven and earth became one. The power of earth was completely different from the power of vast sky. If there was only one of the two, it would inevitably be biased. Although he could still reach an extremely high level, his yin and yang would always be out of balance. Only by becoming one with heaven and earth could one truly become an immortal. While Gu Duxing was regulating his breathing, time was also slowly passing by. Dong Wushang, Xie Danqiong, and the others were like shooting stars chasing after the moon. Their hearts burned like fire as they rushed towards Big Western Sky. Only when they stepped into Big Western Sky's borders did they know how desperate Gu Duxing's battle was. In the past, they only heard rumors, and knew some numbers from Tianji Intelligence Department's information. However, only when they truly faced this world did they know that Gu Duxing was not easy. The moment they truly saw the battlefield, only then did they know this battle was actually so heaven-shaking and peerless. This is the battlefield of that day's great battle? A 7-star bodyguard had already used the most cruel method of separating tendons and dislocating bones to interrogate the captive that had just been captured. This guy was a military officer of Big Western Sky, but he was forcibly captured by a 7-star bodyguard from the military camp. Even when he was captured, this guy was doing something by himself, and was not wearing any clothes on his body. The great battle had just ended, and he had experienced such a desperate campaign. As a military officer, doing something else was also understandable. Still, Imolay Air could not bear to watch, and allowed him to put on his clothes. Yes, this is the place. This is really the battlefield of that day. This general impatiently looked at the several evil people in front of him, his face filled with an expression that was almost about to collapse. He cried and howled, "Why don't you believe me? What I said was the truth. Lying and beating me is not wrong, but what I said was the truth. Why, Thinking about how since he had been captured, it had not been much time since he had been captured, and he had already endured as if he had reincarnated 18 times in the 18 layers of hell, yet he was still not allowed to die. This general almost wanted to dig out his own heart and swear an oath. This was really too torturous. These people were too evil, too cruel, what was that? Your mother's fart. Lying with your eyes wide open, and you still dare to feel wronged? Dong Wushang slapped his face and fiercely roared, "This place is clearly a sea. Did your family send troops to war in the sea? Are you all fucking fish? Fighting in the sea? Even if you are all fish, are Duxing Heavenly Emperor's side also fish? Truth? Bullshit truth." Dong Wushang was originally a very calm person. Among his brothers, besides Gu Duxing, he was the most taciturn. But thinking that Gu Duxing was currently in a situation where life and death were uncertain, whether intentionally or unintentionally, he always had a kind of impulse to destroy the world. Originally, this place was the heaven-inserting mountain range of the Big Western Sky. Casually ask the people of the Big Western Sky and they would know. How can this be faked? It really is several mountain ranges. This general felt so wrong that he wanted to cry again. I didn't lie, what I said was the truth. This was the battlefield of that day's great battle. Why don't you believe what I said? Why, Xie Danqiong stopped Dong Wushang, who was about to open his mouth again, and asked pensively, "You mean to say, this place was originally a plain? A mountainous region? But after that battle, it became a sea?" At this moment, this general looked at Xie Danqiong as if he was looking at his own father, and nodded like he was pounding garlic. Yes, it was like this. It really was like this. He was so moved that he almost cried again. My dear mother, there's finally someone who can understand the human language. My dear father, I've finally met you. That battle, how many troops did both sides dispatch? Xie Dan Qiong stood up and looked at the vast ocean-like body of water in front of him. It was boundless, and his complexion was heavy. A single battle had directly turned the land into a sea. How much energy was needed to create this situation? Xie Dan Qiong had already faintly guessed what kind of attack Gu Duxing and his army had encountered, and what kind of attack they had endured. Our big Western Skies side dispatched 23 million elite battle strength. This general's tears and snot mingled together. The other side, the solitary emperor's side, probably only had a little more than 14 million people. After this great battle, countless brothers have all thrown their bones here. The total military strength of both sides reached 37 million people. Dong Wushang, Mo Lei Air, and Xie Dan Qiong all sucked in a mouthful of cold air. You tell me in detail about that battle from beginning to end, Xie Dan Qiong said. At the same time, his complexion became gloomy. I didn't expect it to be on such a scale. That day, when I dealt with you on Tianji, I didn't mobilize such a large amount of military strength. Second brother Gu, how are you now? In that battle, the solitary emperor led the army. Their offensive was like a tide, and their imposing manner was like a rainbow. They finally approached here. As long as they advanced another 3,000 li, they would reach the Western Sky imperial capital. At that time, the situation was tantamount to already forcing our big Western Sky to a dead end. Every army that came to rescue the king assembled, and the imperial guards all moved out, but the battle situation was still extremely not optimistic. Although this guy's strength wasn't good, when he talked about things, it was clear and logical. At that time, the big Western Sky side gathered 23 million troops. They were nicknamed an army of billions. Both sides agreed to carry out the final decisive battle here. After the battle, the winner would be the king, and the loser would be the bandit. There would be no complaints or regrets. Xie Dan Qiong took a deep breath. Who proposed this? It was our Mad Sword Sky Emperor. This person said. Dong Wushang cursed. Looking at the current battle situation, combined with the situation at that time, anyone could guess that this so-called final decisive battle was a conspiracy. From beginning to end, it was a conspiracy through and through. But at that time, it had already reached this stage. But it also didn't allow Gu Duxing to shrink back. Besides, there was a precedent. At that time, Dong Wushang defeated Extreme Heaven Merciless Heavenly Emperor Zhe Wuqing. The winner would be the king, and the loser would be the bandit. Not long ago, Ao Xie Yun similarly defeated Heavenly Emperor Qing Shao, and also smoothly ascended the throne. Now, the big Western Sky Emperor Wu Yaquang also proposed this kind of challenge to Gu Duxing. If he were Gu Duxing, would he accept? This choice already didn't need to be questioned. Since this battle could decide the world and reduce casualties, how could he not accept? If he could decide the world in one battle, in the future when he counterattacked the heavenly demons, he could have more strength to participate in the battle. From beginning to end, the advantages outweighed the disadvantages. Besides, even if Wu Yaquang acted shamelessly afterwards, Gu Duxing also had confidence that he would undoubtedly win this battle. Moreover, to Gu Duxing, the temptation of accomplishing everything in one battle was too big. Besides the enemy dying a lot less, his own brothers could also avoid sacrificing themselves. Therefore, Gu Duxing really didn't have any reason to refuse. And this conspiracy, or perhaps it could be said to be an overt plot, was formed at this time. In that battle, both sides brought their troops forward. Heavenly Emperor Du Xing set up a big camp at the base of Heavenly Moat Peak, and 100 li across from him was our big Western Sky Army, and Heavenly Moat Peak was the main peak of the mountain range. And behind the continuous mountain range was the sea. Chapter 2577. Following this sentence, Dong Wushang and Xie Dan Qiong simultaneously looked towards the Great Sea. Immediately, the two Sky Emperors opened negotiations and settled on the method of battle for both sides. The solitary emperor leaned towards a small-scale decisive battle, with the masses as witnesses, deciding victory or defeat in one battle. But the frenzied sword sky emperor leaned towards a full-scale decisive battle. One side's battle formation completely collapsed and ended. Everyone sighed together. With Gu Duxing's heroic spirit, he naturally hoped that a large-scale battle could be avoided. Only the battle between himself and Wu Yi, although there was a certain degree of risk, was the best conclusion that Gu Duxing recognized. The final decision was that both sides would send out 10,000 elites for a decisive battle. But, at the moment when the 10,000 experts of the Big Western Sky were defeated one by one, and were on the verge of total collapse, I don't know who gave the order, but the Big Western Sky's army of 10 million moved out together. In the blink of an eye, the 10,000 people of the solitary emperor were surrounded. To actually be able to do this kind of thing, truly despicable and shameless. Xie Danqiong and Dong Wushang cursed at the same time. A sky emperor could unexpectedly go back on his word in the midst of defeat, and eat his words in front of tens of millions of people. This was truly an unbelievable matter. Seeing this, the subordinates of the solitary emperor were furious. At the same time, they rushed up, and an extremely large-scale chaotic battle broke out just like that. This guy looked at Dong Wushang and Xie Danqiong's unsightly faces and very tactfully took the initiative to stand on Gu Duxing's side. Although the frenzied sword sky emperor used a trick and temporarily obtained a bit of the initiative, under the fierce offensive of the solitary emperor's heavenly armament pavilion, he quickly fell into a disadvantageous position again. The solitary emperor's heavenly armament pavilion's command was effective, and the soldiers were attentive. The soldiers risked their lives, and after this great battle continued for a day and night, the heavenly armament pavilion's side occupied the absolute upper hand. At that time, the entire battlefield was dyed red with blood, and both sides suffered disastrous casualties. It was a scene of devastation, and the battle situation had already reached a clear moment. The solitary emperor led the experts under his command, and directly pressured the Big Western Sky Army. The frenzied sword sky emperor could no longer avoid it. He could only come forward to meet the battle, but, at the most crucial moment, the Holy Emperor's palace's men suddenly appeared and joined the battle. The Holy Emperor's palace's side had thousands of high-level saint experts and above fly into the battlefield, instantly changing the situation. The one who truly played a decisive role was still His Majesty the Sage Monarch himself. His Majesty, the Sage Monarch, had heavily injured the solitary martial emperor the first time he had attacked. Following which, the battle started to become one-sided. The solitary emperor's heavenly armament pavilion had no leader. However, there were still 1,000 experts who used self-detonation and risked their lives to stop the sage from pursuing the solitary emperor. The solitary emperor didn't fall and his current whereabouts are unknown. This section was not the knowledge of this officer. It was a conclusion drawn by the experts of Holy Emperor Palace after the battle. If not for that, even so, no matter how many ordinary experts there were, they still wouldn't be able to obstruct the pursuit of a saint. This was the only way. Only by directly triggering the power of heaven and earth, destroying the terrain and merging the ocean and the land into one in the violent explosion could the powerful spiritual sense be blocked. Then, the heavenly armament pavilion, which was at the end of its road, finally had tens of thousands of experts self-destruct at the same time. They blasted apart the mountain range on the other side, collapsing over 200 mountain peaks, allowing the boundless ocean to rush in, trapping both friend and foe in the midst of the raging waves. At this point, we have finally stopped His Majesty the Sage Monarch from pursuing the solitary emperor, and this battle has come to an end. All the injured people who were trapped in the raging waves were exhausted and heavily injured. They couldn't differentiate between friend and foe and were all buried in the raging waves. There was no longer any hope of survival. Of the 14 million elite troops of the solitary emperor, less than 2 million were able to withdraw from the battlefield. Even these troops have been scattered in the martial world. After listening to this, Xie Danqiong and Dong Wushang felt as if their hearts were being twisted by a knife. Although they knew that Gu Duxing's battle would be tragic, They didn't expect it to be this tragic. With more than 10 million troops against more than 20 million, the victory was sealed in one day and one night, but it was destroyed by Holy Emperor only. Holy Emperor made a move and the experts of Holy Emperor Palace collectively intervened in the battle. Such power. Even if it wasn't just Gu Duxing, even if all the brothers were there, they might not be able to withstand it. The defeat of this battle was expected and reasonable, but it was still extremely painful. Holy Emperor only hadn't intervened in any battle of the Heavenly Court for more than 1,000,000 years. Who would have thought that he would suddenly make a move at such a crucial moment? And in such a way that was close to a sneak attack. If it wasn't for us destroying one of his bases and completely enraging him, I'm afraid that second brother Gu would have already succeeded. Dong Wuxiang looked up and sighed. His side had achieved victory, but the consequences were that the brothers had to suffer heavy retaliation. Was all of this worth it or not? Xie Dan Qiong said deeply, the 10,000 Saints' true spirit is a hidden danger that must be eliminated. Even if we have to pay a huge price, it must be eliminated. As for Holy Emperor, we will have to face him sooner or later. In other words, such a loss is unavoidable. Now, the only hope is that nothing happens to second brother Gu. As long as he's still alive, we will have a chance to make a comeback. The most important thing now is to find second brother Gu as soon as possible. He has been severely injured by Holy Emperor, and his situation is very likely to be the same as Ji Mo's. Xie Dan Qiong said deeply. His eyes fell on the guy in front of him, revealing an undisguised murderous intent. I actually admire the solitary emperor a lot. I've long wanted to surrender, but I didn't have a good chance. Today, I've seen two heroes. This guy hadn't even finished his flattery when he was slapped to death by Xie Dan Qiong. If you weren't caught, how could you admire Gu Duxing? Changing the rudder according to the wind, such a person's death isn't worth pitying. At this time, a shout came from afar. Who's there? Immediately, a group of people came searching. Dong Wuxiang and the others were worried that they didn't have a place to inquire about Gu Duxing's whereabouts. Seeing that someone had come, they weren't alarmed, but were instead happy, and directly went to greet them. A day later, Xie Dan Qiong and Dong Wuxiang looked at each other speechlessly, their faces full of worry. On this day, they had killed and repelled no less than 10 big Western Skies troops and horses, and had captured no less than 200 people for interrogation. From low to high, there were officials of all ranks, and the scope of their travel had already expanded to several thousand li in circumference. However, from beginning to end, there was no news of Gu Duxing. It was as if Gu Duxing and Bu Luqing had completely disappeared from this world. Although no news was equal to good news, Gu Duxing had been seriously injured by the Saint Monarch, and his injuries were absolutely not ordinary. This was different from the general situation. The only gain was that they had obtained a piece of news related to Gu Duxing, but also unrelated. The solitary emperor's black dragon sword had already been confirmed to have fallen into the hands of the crazed sword Sky Emperor. Since Wu Yaquang was known as the crazed sword Sky Emperor, he naturally had a special fondness for swords. Suddenly obtaining such a peerless divine weapon, he truly regarded it as a treasure, unwilling to let it leave his side. How could second brother's sword be left in that bastard's hands? Dong Wuxiang flew into a rage. Xie Dan Qiong and Mo Lei Er also flew into a rage at the same time, filled with righteous indignation. However, the real reason was actually, the three people's hearts were filled with fear. They were all afraid. Gu Duxing's sword had always been inseparable. There had always been a saying, if the sword exists, the person exists. If the sword dies, the person dies. Now, the black dragon sword was actually in Wu Yaquang's hands. Then what about the person? The three people didn't even dare to think about it, but they felt waves of stabbing pain in their hearts. No matter what, we have to get second brother's sword back. Dong Wuxiang and Xie Dan Qiong gritted their teeth. Let's go find Wu Yaquang. Stop right there. Mo Lei Er was shocked and hurriedly stopped the two people who were about to move. It was reasonable for Dong Wuxiang to have such an impulse, but Xie Dan Qiong actually didn't care at all at this moment. which made Immortal somewhat curious and even more surprised. Do the two of you still think that there will be people who will acknowledge your status as Sky Emperors here? The saint is here, and he was originally worried that he wouldn't be able to find you. Aren't you just delivering food to him by coming here so rashly? Immortal asked unhappily. The two of them panted heavily. But, no matter what, the black dragon sword can't fall into Wu Yequang's hands. Even if we die, we have to get it back. Immortal had a helpless look on her face. Have the two of your brains been squeezed together by the door? I didn't say that you can't get it back, but you can use other methods. What methods? The two of them perked up. For example, you can steal it? Immortal raised her eyebrows. It's a pity that Ribarong isn't here either. Dong Wuxiang was a little regretful. If I knew that we would need to steal it, I would have let him come along. Distant water can't put out a nearby fire. Is stealing very difficult? Immortal looked at Dong Wuxiang in disdain. In the whole world, only Ribarong knows how to steal? Have you forgotten what your wife does? How difficult can it be to steal a sword? Dong Wuxiang was taken aback by his wife's sudden words. That's right, he was only thinking about Ribarong, the godly thief, and neglected his wife's greatest ability. The Black Demon was once the strongest assassin in the heavenly continent, and the one and only. Even in this heavenly imperial court, Dong Wuxiang was still confident that his wife was still the most outstanding assassin in this world. And the most important thing for an assassin was undoubtedly to be invisible. The more outstanding an assassin was, the less traces they would leave behind when they moved. From this point, it was similar to Rui Budong's godly thief technique. Furthermore, the best thief in the world might not kill people, but it was very easy for the best assassin in the world to steal something. Tonight, the five of you will go and cause trouble in 5 different directions. Try to make it as big as possible, but don't expose yourself. I will sneak in alone and steal the black dragon sword. Immortal said casually. She didn't say a word in her heart. If it was suitable, she would also steal the head of Wu Yequang. Chapter 2578. All right. Xie Danxiong and Dong Wuxiang had no objections to Immortal's arrangement. Immortal's strength was definitely not inferior to anyone in tribulation. She was even stronger than GMO and Luo Kadi. It could be said that she already had 1 foot in the level of Emperor 1. Even if it was difficult to steal the Black Dragon Sword from the Maniac Sword Heavenly Emperor this time, there was no need to worry about her own safety. Yes, we still have to wait. We have to scout for information first. At least, we have to confirm where Wu Yequang is staying now. Xie Danxiong said, Wu Yequang regards swords as his life. A divine weapon like the Black Dragon Sword will definitely be valued more. So, it must be with him. And there's a high chance that it's stored in his space ring. As a heavenly emperor, there must be more than one storage device. So, there are still many difficulties in Lei-er's operation. Immortal nodded lightly. What Xie Danxiong said was the objective truth. These were indeed problems that needed to be considered. But since Wu Yequang had fought with Second Brother before, and it was because he was about to lose that he intervened with the strength of a Saint Monarch. Then, with Second Brother's sharpness, it's impossible for Wu Yequang not to be injured. So, I believe that Lei-er's operation this time isn't very difficult. When Dong Wuxiang said this, his expression suddenly changed. He turned his head fiercely and said, Lei-er, you must remember, you're only going to steal the Black Dragon Sword this time, not to kill Wu Yequang. Do you understand? Xie Danxiong was also shocked when he heard that. Stealing the Black Dragon Sword and killing Wu Yequang were 2 completely different things. If Immortal's purpose was only to steal the Black Dragon Sword, then, no matter what, this matter had more than a 90% chance of success. But if she wanted to use this opportunity to kill Wu Yequang, even if she really succeeded in killing him, there was also more than a 90% chance that she would lose her own life. This was definitely not a joke. The risk was extremely high. But if she went and faced a heavily injured Maniac Sword Heavenly Emperor, with a chance to kill him in 1 blow, would she do it? So, this was where the greatest risk lay. Emole could only give up on the idea. She smiled and nodded. I understand. I only want the black dragon sword. That Wu Yakuang is for second brother Gu. Xie Danqiong nodded and said, I know that fourth sister-in-law is a sensible person and will definitely not act rashly. If second brother Gu can't take revenge personally, it's inevitable that you'll regret it. This sentence made Emole really give up on the idea. That night, just as the big Western Skies army was slowly returning, they suddenly encountered an unexpected attack. Enemies were coming from 5 different directions. As far as the eye could see, it was filled with raging flames and shouts of killing shook the heavens. For a moment, it was unknown just how many experts were attacking. There were many tall mountains along the way, but they were actually uprooted and thrown into the large group of people. The mountains of the Heaven Imperial Court were sturdy and had deep roots. Furthermore, with the addition of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Chi, ordinary martial artists, even lifting a piece of rock would be a difficult task. But now, the entire mountain was being thrown down. It would be difficult for anyone below the level of a saint to achieve such a feat. The rumbling sound continued without end. Although the army also had experts, and if they were vigilant, they might not be unable to deal with it. However, this was the time when the previous battle was taking a break, and a group of defeated soldiers and generals had just retreated from the battlefield. Their own strength was inevitably not complete, and at this moment, they were caught off guard and hastily made a move. How could they take care of everything, and there were still many people who were crushed to death? And the enemies in the dark seemed to be completely unwearied. All kinds of tall mountains and all kinds of large rocks flew like raindrops. For a moment, the earth cracked and the mountains collapsed, the earth broke and the sky was startled. So much so that as they walked, a large hole suddenly appeared on the road, and countless soldiers fell down with a bang. This kind of harassment caused the big Western Skies army to be in an extremely difficult situation, and they were completely at a loss. Under the careful protection of the army's experts, although the following attacks basically didn't have much effect, the entire army's soldiers had to be on guard from beginning to end. On this road, they were really jittery, and every bush and tree was an enemy. As long as there was even the slightest sign of trouble, everyone would be in danger, and they would be in a constant state of panic. Everyone's hearts were on the verge of collapse. How many days had it been since they withdrew from that desperate battlefield? The shadow of their deaths still hadn't had enough time to disperse. At night, when they closed their eyes, it seemed as if the heavenly armament pavilion was still charging. Tens of millions of comrades had died here, and they themselves had escaped from death and were still worried about whether or not there would be any repercussions. They didn't expect that they would unexpectedly be attacked here. However, everyone's hearts were prepared, and they all understood. These attacks were undoubtedly from the solitary emperor's subordinate elite experts coming to retaliate. This kind of thing was really very common. In the past few days, they had already suffered no less than several hundred similar attacks. Although the previous attacks weren't as powerful as today's, they were more or less used to it. If they died, then they died, but if they lived, they could only say that they were lucky. With regards to the attackers, they had only encountered 2 of the enemies in the 5 directions. After a big battle, the enemies didn't try to be brave and act rashly. As soon as they saw that things weren't good, they quickly fled. As for the other 3 directions, they simply disappeared without a trace. Even if they had encountered those 2 people, they were fighting with their faces covered, but the strength of these 2 people was really a bit too terrifying. If it weren't for the fact that the other side didn't have the heart to continue fighting, and really went all out to meet them, they were afraid that all of the people who had participated in intercepting them would have completely lost their lives in their hands. Therefore, the experts who had participated in the battle all had lingering fears. The strength of these 2 enemies was really too strong. Although they didn't dare to say these words clearly, they all had their own guesses in their hearts. The strength of the enemies they had encountered, I'm afraid they weren't inferior to His Majesty the Crazed Sword Heavenly Emperor, so much so that they were even stronger. Could these 2 people be the Solitary Emperor and Bu Luqing who had reappeared in the mortal world to counterattack the big Western Sky? Although they clearly knew that this was impossible, everyone's hearts were still covered with a layer of shadow. It was as if they could see those two heaven-shocking and exceptional treasured swords rushing over with the power to chop through the clouds and heaven and earth. Just thinking about it made their backs break out in cold sweat and their whole bodies turn cold. Previously, hundreds of people had surrounded them, but a third of them had been destroyed by the other side. They hadn't even used weapons. Furthermore, among those people who had been destroyed, there were still many high-level saint experts. How could the scene before their eyes not make them terrified? Everyone had lingering fears in their hearts. Your sister, the next time we encounter an attack, will passively wait in the camp. If a big stone is thrown, we'll deal with the big stone. If a big mountain is thrown, we'll deal with the big mountain. But even if we die, we won't go out and face the person who threw the stone. This is too damn dangerous. It was a mess. Immortal quietly entered the main camp. With her ability to hide and conceal her tracks that had already reached the pinnacle, wandering around in this kind of extremely chaotic main camp naturally could be said to be effortless. However, wanting to find the frenzied sword Heavenly Emperor Wuyaquang's location in this kind of chaotic military camp was still somewhat difficult. Checking one camp after another, she then gave up and rushed forward. Every camp that Immortal chose to check was the core camp. Those were places where the frenzied sword Heavenly Emperor might be located. Furthermore, they had to possess the atmosphere of tight security. Immortal continuously checked dozens of camps like this, but she still didn't find anything. Time was limited, and the results of checking like this were too low. Finally simply jumped high into the air, checking all the way according to the imposing manner. Finally, almost at the very front of the camp, the atmosphere was even more strict, greatly different from the core camp that she had checked before. Immortal couldn't help but pat her own head. She was still used to being an assassin in the past 3 days, and her habitual thinking was restricted. She always thought that hiding and concealing her tracks would mean sneaking in. In fact, she should have chosen to start checking from the air early on. This was simply clear at a glance. If she did this early on, she would probably have found the target long ago, and might even have succeeded already. Vexed, Immortal's body was like a breeze, silently wandering in midair, checking every camp. At this moment, Wuyaquang was recuperating in his own tent. That battle with Gu Duxing previously really caused him quite a lot of damage. Although he was currently in a state of rapid movement, Wuyaquang was still trying his best to recuperate and recover, but he was still weak now. Gu Duxing's sword aura was still in his body until now, constantly destroying his body. This made the frenzied sword Heavenly Emperor suffer unspeakably, but he could only grit his teeth and swallow his blood. He couldn't say it out loud, and he couldn't show any signs of pain. The dignity of a sovereign still had to be maintained. Furthermore, he had to pay attention to extravagance as usual. This wasn't extravagance and wastage, but to stabilize the morale of the army. To create an atmosphere of everything is under my control, there's no need to worry about anything. Therefore, the tent he was in now could be said to be ingenious, dignified, rich, and luxurious. Everything was not inferior to the furniture he had in the capital. As a heavenly emperor, he still had this bit of extravagance. The surroundings of the camp where Wuyaquang was in were completely silent. In fact, there were people everywhere, but not the slightest sound of breathing could be heard. Not even the sound of mounts could be heard. Only the howling of the wind blew past, but it seemed to blow past an empty space. If not for the occasional rustling of the flags, even if someone walked past, they probably wouldn't know that there were hundreds of thousands of people here. Just this point alone was enough to show how elite this group of people was. They had already reached a sensational level. The surroundings were sealed by the divine senses of 8 peak-level saints working together. If Wuyaquang wanted to look outside, he only needed to release his divine senses and touch, and he would be able to hear all the movements in the outside world. But the people outside definitely wouldn't hear anything in this tent. Unless Wuyaquang allowed it. And Wuyaquang definitely wouldn't allow it. This was Wuyaquang's usual habit. He definitely didn't want anyone to know about his private life. This was human nature in the first place. A heavenly emperor had higher requirements in this aspect, and his execution was also more perfect. Now, he had just circulated his energy to suppress Gu Duxing's sword aura and felt a little better. At the same time that he was cursing Gu Duxing in his heart, his hand was also playing with a sword. It was that black dragon sword. Chapter 2579. The body of the black dragon sword was long and slender. It was clearly a bright color, but when everyone looked at it, they would feel that this sword was black. This was the result of the craftsman's unique ingenuity during the forging process. Although Chu Yang had used a large amount of heavenly materials to reforge this sword many times, the original appearance of this sword had never changed. The hilt of the sword was a very simple dragon head. Although it was simple, when anyone looked at it, they would immediately feel like they were looking at an all-powerful dragon. At the position of the guard, there was a slightly protruding dragon claw. It was only a vague shape, but its scales and claws flew naturally, filled with a cold and domineering aura. And it was this domineering aura filled with cold and arrogance that gave Wuyaquang an abrupt feeling. Because this should be Gu Duxing's long process of communicating with the sword heart of the black dragon sword. Gu Duxing's lonely and arrogant aura was tainted by Gu Duxing's. This lonely and arrogant aura made Wuyaquang feel a faint pain in his body. He took 2 deep breaths. The body of the sword was slender and the tip was slender. That bloodthirsty feeling was faintly emitted. Only, Wuyaquang's eyes were filled with regret. The source of his regret was, this sword was not seized by him personally. But, that day the attack of the saint already had the power to destroy the black dragon sword. And at that time, Gu Duxing took the initiative to throw the sword away in order to protect himself. This caused the black dragon sword to be forced away from him. Otherwise, the only outcome would be that the black dragon sword would be broken first, sacrificing himself. To protect Gu Duxing, it is truly a peerless divine weapon. Wuyaquang exclaimed in admiration and took out his own sword. He poured the same amount of energy into both swords and waved them at the same time. A ray of cold light flashed. The 2 swords collided with each other without any fuss. Clang! A soft sword sound rang. The sword that Wuyaquang took out later broke into 2. The front half fell to the ground with a clang, the tip of the sword jumping with cold light. But the black dragon sword was not damaged at all. Good sword, Wuyaquang praised from the bottom of his heart. Although the sword that he had just taken out was not the strongest divine weapon that he had always used, it was still within the range of the celestial imperial court. However, it was absolutely a treasured sword that could be counted as a divine weapon. How could a treasured sword that could be collected by a celestial emperor be ordinary? But it was this kind of divine weapon. Under the peerless sharpness of the black dragon sword, it did not have any ability to resist at all. It couldn't even leave the slightest bit of damage to the black dragon sword. The black dragon sword was something that Wuyaquang had never seen before. The most outstanding sword. This made his heart ache. Greed was aroused. Who wouldn't want to own such a peerless divine blade? He frowned as he stared at the black dragon sword. There was a question in his heart. Why did the sage seize this sword and not keep it for himself, but instead give it to me? Even if it was the holy monarch, he wouldn't be able to resist such a divine weapon, right? Why didn't he want it? This question flashed through his mind. His mind was once again occupied by the black dragon sword. He was happy that the sword had finally fallen into his hands. He was a little hesitant in his heart, because the black dragon sword already had a complete sword soul. And the formation of this sword soul was because of Gu Duxing. Gu Duxing accompanied it with his heart, supported it with his sword's resolve, nourished it with his divine soul, accompanied it day and night, forming the sword soul. Therefore, this sword soul was completely loyal to Gu Duxing and would never betray him. If Wuyaquang wanted to completely possess the sword, he must obtain the recognition of the sword soul. But to do this, he must defeat the original owner of the sword head-on, which was to defeat Gu Duxing face-to-face. This point, to Wuyaquang, was simply powerless. Of course, Wuyaquang could also choose to destroy the sword soul. But if he wanted to erase this sword soul, He could possess this sword forever and no longer need to worry about being devoured. But the level of this sword would immediately drop, degenerating into an ordinary weapon. The only thing that could be retained was the sharpness, this characteristic. It would no longer have any other mystical functions. It was as if a person had lost all consciousness and turned into a walking corpse. This way of doing things was equivalent to destroying this divine weapon. To the frenzied sword heavenly emperor who loved swords like his life, this was clearly unacceptable. Letting out a sigh, Wu Yequang started trying again. His divine sense slowly entered the long sword and started trying to soften the sword's soul again. With Wu Yequang's strength, wanting to subdue the sword's soul in one go was absolutely impossible. He could only choose the second-rate softening strategy. Clang. The black dragon sword suddenly emitted a sword cry full of rage, seemingly angry, resisting and resisting. However, Wu Yequang's divine sense still continued to enter, releasing a warm aura, seemingly appeasing, completely without any evil thoughts. He even released his heart domain, opening up his complete inner heart, in order to obtain the black dragon sword's recognition with the most candid and honest attitude. But the black dragon sword did not appreciate it at all. The sword body flickered, emitting sword cries of resistance one after another. Clang, 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 clang. Wu Yequang could clearly feel what these sword cries respectively represented. Get lost. Get lost. Get lost. I don't want you. Hurry up and get lost. It was as if Gu Duxing was still in control of this sword. As Wu Yequang's divine sense continued to enter, the black dragon sword was finally enraged and completely exploded. A gust of black gas suddenly condensed from the sword body, and a small black dragon appeared out of nowhere. The small black dragon's eyes were filled with indescribable anger and hatred. Then, with a sharp cry, it transformed into a sharp sword aura, flashing towards Wu Yequang. Wu Yequang immediately retracted his divine sense and retreated in a flash. That sword aura just now was not very strong, not even enough to break through Wu Yequang's protective cultivation, but it had the sharpness to cut Wu Yequang's divine sense in half. Looking at that small black dragon shaking its head and wagging its tail, and turning around the sword body in victory, it actually felt a little proud. Wu Yequang was completely out of ideas. He could not subdue it in one go, and he could not soften it slowly either. It was obvious that neither force nor persuasion worked. It was just a sword. It was actually the most difficult piece of meat to deal with. Frowning, he said in distress, "Do I have to destroy it? Destroy this rare divine sword?" Mo lay, or quietly approached this tent from a high altitude. In an instant, she already felt the mental blockade of several high-level saints. If she wanted to forcibly break through this blockade and go in, she could actually do it. But if she wanted to quietly sneak in without alerting these people, it was absolutely impossible. Carefully observed the divine sense blockade below, actively thinking of a way. Even if the chances were slim, she still had to put in 1,200,000% effort. Because right now, she was already completely certain. The one inside this tent was definitely the frenzied sword heavenly emperor, Wu Yequang. This was already a fact that did not need to be doubted. She believed that other than the frenzied sword heavenly emperor, in the core area of the Big Western Skies official military camp, there was no one else who had the qualifications to make 8 peak-level saints guard the door for him. But right now, the core issue was, how should I go in? I still have to go in without alerting anyone. If I can't even go in, how can I still talk about stealing the sword? Far away. The rumbling sounds were still unending. That was Dong Wushang and the others creating chaos. It must be said that Dong Wushang and the others created chaos very, very well. Mo Yuntian and the other 7-star guards strictly followed Mo Lei's instructions and acted carefully. They created one incident after another, but from start to finish, they did not expose their whereabouts. And Dong Wushang and Xie Dan Qiong, these 2 heavenly emperors, were not creating chaos at all. They were simply venting their anger. After concealing themselves for a while, they very straightforwardly launched a frontal attack, vigorously venting the anger that had accumulated during this period of time. Just based on their current strength, after experiencing the battle with the Saint Monarch's clone, as well as Chu Yang's guidance, their cultivation had also made considerable progress. Purely based on the understanding of the realm, they were probably already above Gu Duxing, who was fighting with Wu Yequang. Even if Wu Yequang personally came out to deal with them, he might not necessarily be able to deal with any one of them. With them launching a frontal attack like this, how could those big Western Sky soldiers who had been attacked be alright? At least they still remembered to scrupulously abide by Mo's request and did not launch a large-scale massacre. If they really launched an unbridled massacre, then the number of people who would die would certainly be many. Of course, now that they did not know the movements of the Saint Monarch's side, if they rashly launched all their strength, it might attract the Saint Monarch's side. That way, not only would they really beat the grass to scare the snake, it might even lead to a fatal disaster. Therefore, concealing their strength was still very necessary. Currently, the premise was still to create local chaos. But those chaos, to the ordinary soldiers, perhaps would be incessantly complaining, but to the people guarding here at the crazed sword Heavenly Emperor's camp, it did not have any meaning and did not have any effect at all. They seemed to be deaf and blind, unable to hear or see at all. They turned a blind eye to the chaos of the army. They simply would not move a bit from their position. Behind Mo's veil, her pretty face was gloomy and her eyebrows were slightly knitted. In the blink of an eye, she had already thought of no less than 70 to 80 methods, but she felt that none of them were useful. Now, she could only continue to wait for a turning point. Just as she was pondering, suddenly, a sword chime came from below. All the movements in this tent were sealed by the saint's divine senses. By right, no sound should be transmitted out. But this sword chime seemed to have passed through the sound of the soul and came out from the heavy seal of the divine senses. Her heart stirred, and she instantly no longer hesitated. This sword chime gave birth to a kind of intuition that was Gu Duxing's black dragon sword. Furthermore, it should be Wu Yequang currently attempting to remove the influence of Gu Duxing's divine sense. And only this kind of thing born from the spirituality of heaven and earth could break through the heavy seal of the divine senses here and make a sound. The extreme anger of the sword chime made Mo directly no longer consider. If she found the black dragon sword, she would be able to find Gu Duxing. Because, with the guidance of the sword soul, but if the sword soul was destroyed, then it would really be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Her body moved, and she silently swept down from a height of 10,000 feet. At this moment, Mo was like a black wind, falling like a meteor in the boundless night sky. Chapter 2580. Wu Yequang held the black dragon sword in his hand, full of helplessness, full of reluctance. Just now, when the sword spirit appeared, that sword energy completely showed its unyielding determination. A loyal minister would not serve two masters. The divine sword also naturally chose its master. Wu Yequang had tried both subduing and softening, but they were all unsuccessful. And if he wanted to change the situation, unless Gu Duxing really died, but, very unfortunately, from the moment he obtained the black dragon sword, Wu Yequang knew that Gu Duxing did not die. The reason was very simple. If Gu Duxing died, the sword spirit that was closely related to his soul would definitely be affected. It was not that he did not want to rely on the black dragon sword's response to guide him to find Gu Duxing, but Wu Yequang was very quickly disappointed. The black dragon sword completely did not listen to his command. Moreover, it saw him as an enemy. Other than resisting Wu Yequang's erasure, the rest of the time, it did nothing. Going out for a stroll, it also did nothing. This kind of completely uncooperative, how could he find Gu Duxing? If it really had that plan, Wu Yequang absolutely would not doubt. Not only would the black dragon sword not help him find Gu Duxing, it could even possibly bring him to the other Heavenly Armament Pavilion's headquarters and kill him. Wu Yequang sighed helplessly and was about to put away the black dragon sword. To really erase the black dragon sword spirit, Wu Yequang really was still reluctant. But, just at this time, an unforeseen event occurred. Suddenly, heaven and earth shook, and Wu Yequang could not help but be shocked. Immortal Air's entire person fell like a meteor, falling extremely fast, instantly coming into contact with the saint's divine sense. But in the first moment, she broke through the blockade, and with a boom, she directly rushed into the tent. The several experts responsible for guarding outside only felt their own divine sense suddenly shake. The layers of divine sense blockade that they painstakingly laid down were unexpectedly broken through in the first moment by someone using the most barbaric method. Without exception, all of their divine senses were damaged. Everyone was shocked at the same time and jumped up one after another. But they immediately discovered that a figure had already rushed into the tent. Although it was only the blink of an eye, someone indeed went in. Protect the emperor. Several people all had the same thought and rushed in. The guards all around were also vigilant at the same time. The entire camp was in chaos. The only area that was originally considered calm in the entire western sky also became chaotic. Just as Wu Yequang's fingers touched the black dragon sword's hilt, the roof of the tent suddenly collapsed. It collapsed without any warning, and then a fierce gust of wind rushed towards him. Wu Yequang instinctively retreated and flicked his wrist. His sword was already in his hand. 10,000 rays of golden light were sprinkled out. A strong enemy. Just one sword strike was enough to make him feel that this sudden enemy's cultivation was definitely not below his, and was enough to pose a threat to him. He had to go all out. If he insisted on using the black dragon sword to fight the enemy at this time, the black dragon sword would be disloyal to him. Once it backfired, it would cause a certain degree of interference to him, which was tantamount to suicide. This was the result of Wu Yequang's sudden change. He came to a conclusion in an instant. Therefore, Wu Yequang chose the best way to face the enemy. Giving up on touching the black dragon sword, he drew his long sword in his hand, and 10,000 rays of golden light gushed out. Attacking and defending at the same time, both offensive and defensive. First, put yourself in an invincible position. This was his territory. As long as there was a little bit of resistance, the guards outside would swarm in. Even if the incoming person's strength was astonishing and not below his, it was also impossible to pose a threat to him. Boom! The entire tent was instantly torn apart. It was as if a bomb had exploded in the center of the tent. Everything in the tent, without exception, had turned into cotton wool and was blown away. Then they were shot out. A faintly discernible black-clothed figure quietly existed, and countless rays of cold light suddenly shot out. A low and cold voice said, "Wu Yequang, your time of death has arrived." Cold light danced and instantly enveloped Heavenly Emperor Maniac Sword's entire body. Although Wu Yequang was startled, he did not panic. He sneered and said, "Not necessarily." Brandishing his long sword, he defended with all his might and was even more cautious. Clang, clang, clang. Wu Yequang's body trembled slightly and he retreated. The other party's hidden weapons came from all directions, everywhere. Each hidden weapon was mixed with tyrannical power. Wu Yequang had not recovered from his serious injuries to begin with. After the battle with Gu Duxing previously, his vitality had not recovered until now. Suddenly facing such a strong enemy, fighting head-on was absolutely unwise. Moreover, his reinforcements had already arrived. Why should he fight head-on? Defending with all his might was the best strategy. However, Wu Yequang was secretly alarmed. The other party's killing intent was not concealed at all. It looked like this time, they were here to assassinate him. Such an elusive assassin. It was really impossible to guard against. Wu Yequang was ultimately a descendant of Di, and his strength was not weak. Although he had not recovered from his serious injuries and Immortal's sudden attack was powerful, they were still unable to break through his defense line in an instant. While they were obstructed, the 8 saints outside had already arrived. They roared at the same time and attacked together. "Scoundrel!" That thin and small figure laughed and suddenly stretched out his hand. As the black dragon sword cheered, it actually automatically landed in the person's hand, as if it was filled with joy and encouragement. Sword light flashed and all kinds of cold light covered the sky and earth. The all-out attack of the 8 peak-level saints instantly arrived. That person clearly had no time to dodge and was forced to take the attack head-on. With a muffled groan, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and the cold light rushed towards Wuxia. The combined attack of the 8 experts was not a small matter. Although that person was already at the level of DE, he was still injured by the combined attack of the 8 experts. However, that person did not retreat and continued to attack Wuxia. Wuxia, even if I die today, I want you to die with me. Wuxia retreated and said coldly, "You're not worthy." However, the moment he retreated, everyone thought that the black-robed figure opposite him would definitely launch a fierce attack. The 8 peak-level saints were already prepared to intercept, but the black-robed figure actually shot up into the sky. From rushing forward to flying, there was absolutely no effort at all. In the blink of an eye, he was already 1,000 feet high. In an instant, he broke away from the divine senses of the experts, including Wuxia. Oh no! This fellow's target is actually the Black Dragon Sword. At this point, everyone finally realized. This was especially true for Wuxia, who was feeling the most regret. He had been too careful. From the moment the Black Dragon Sword willingly fell into that person's hands, he should have realized that this person was related to the Black Dragon Sword. Moreover, although this person was strong, it was impossible for him to take his life in a short period of time. He was too careful for a moment and actually caused the divine sword to be snatched away. This person obviously wanted to escape. Wuxia gritted his teeth. Want to escape? How could it be so easy? Chase. At all costs. Stop him. After giving the order, Wuxia himself flew out. Countless figures leaped up at the same time and chased after him. At this moment, it was no longer important whether their divine senses had locked onto him or not. The black-robed figure shot up into the sky. His target was obvious and could be seen clearly with the naked eye. Outside Wuxia's tent were Wuxia's most trusted personal guards. They had always been well-trained. Those who were qualified to enter this personal guard camp were all experts. The moment the black-robed figure rushed up, countless hidden weapons and arrows covered the entire sky like a swarm of locusts. It was a black mass that could cover the sky. Under such a large-scale attack, no matter who it was, they would not be able to completely avoid it. In addition, there were hundreds of experts who had already leaped up high and attacked from all directions. It was believed that even if the sword thief turned into a flying bird, he would definitely not be able to fly out. Facing the countless attacks, Immortal did not show any signs of fear. With a long whistle, she spat out all the turbid air in her stomach. Suddenly, a white light flashed. The warm snow sword, which had disappeared without a trace, suddenly appeared. The people below only saw her waving her right hand, and the hidden weapons in the sky were all mysteriously cut off. That was not the end of it. The hidden weapons that filled the sky actually changed direction with the wave of the sword and shot down in all directions. Returned to where they came from. At this moment, it was as if a rainstorm of hidden weapons had suddenly fallen from the sky. Below, there were endless screams of agony. The experts who surrounded her all felt a chill in their hearts. This person was actually an expert at the level of DE Empress. If it was not an expert at this level, it would definitely be impossible to create such a sharp counterattack. However, even if the other party was really an expert at the level of DE Empress, there was a limit to one's strength. Under such circumstances, facing so many of them at the same time, I believe that you won't be able to gain any advantage. The attacks came at the same time. However, Immortal let out a muffled groan this time. She suddenly removed all the protection on her body and turned it into a pushing force under her feet. With a swift spin, her entire person seemed to have turned into a tornado, creating a black hole out of thin air. When the attacks of hundreds of experts came at the same time, the boundless force shattered the entire space into pieces. However, the tornado that Immortal had turned into had the ability to turn and dissipate everything. It destroyed 70 to 80% of the hundreds of attacks, but the remaining force still hit Immortal. Immortal violently spat out a mouthful of blood, but her entire person used the remaining force to soar up into the sky like a shooting star. At this moment, everyone watched as the black-robed person broke through the white clouds in the sky and disappeared beyond the white clouds. Almost at the same time, a majestic sword light passed through the place where Immortal was standing just now, turning the shattered space into a black hole. This was the all-out attack that the maniac sword Heavenly the Arch had just managed to unleash when he reacted. It was not even a blink of an eye away from Immortal's departure. Immortal turned into a tornado and used the attack power to leave even if she was injured. It was because of this. Because the maniac sword Heavenly the Arch Wuxia had awakened. Furthermore, he had joined the battle once again. If she was really surrounded, Immortal would probably not have any chance of survival in today's battle. One Wuxia was enough to entangle her to death, and the other experts could totally wear her down easily. Therefore, Immortal made a prompt decision to flee thousands of miles away. She came without a shadow and left without a trace. Once she succeeded, she disappeared without a trace. This was the typical style of an assassin. Today is especially tiring. I feel especially tired and don't feel like writing. It's probably those days of the month where I don't feel like writing again. I braced myself and typed the words, "First update," urging myself to continue exploding. I didn't count wrongly this time, right? I checked thrice. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.